We are live. Welcome to the Map It Forward podcast, everyone. Thanks for joining us. Today's episode is sponsored by FAFCoffees. Hit them up at fafbrazil.com. And if you are looking to buy any Brazilian coffees, reach out to felipecroce at fafcoffees.com. You will find all the details in the show notes below. Today, joining me on the Map It Forward podcast is Mark Inman from Olam Coffees. Welcome, Mark.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
I am very excited to talk to you. So you are a very interesting cat.
Okay.
That's a compliment.
Good.
We have had one conversation before.
Right.
Excuse me. And our conversation just blew me away because it seems like there isn't a part of the industry you haven't been involved in.
I hope if there is one, I'm looking to then go to it. Yeah.
So
like I said, I'm on the path to get the coffee industry's version of the EGOT.
Oh,
so
nice.
And it has to exist. I've been talking about this for years. So the only group that I have not been a board member of or run at this point is the Barista Guild. That's my last hurrah.
Okay.
And then I've done so far every one. And if there's any additional ones, I'm game to
we may end up making
my latte art's pathetic.
Council.
That's why I've avoided the Barista Guild.
Nice. I'm sure there are a couple of 15-year-olds out there that can teach you how to do that.
Yeah. Well, good. I could use the help.
For anyone who doesn't know what an EGOT is an Emmy, a Grammy, an Oscar, and a Tony. So
right.
For any ambiguity that's out there. Now, you have, to give people an understanding of what we mean by everything. You've done everything. You've owned a farm, an organic coffee farm, right? Is that correct?
Not a coffee farm, an organic farm in California.
Okay. Right.
So we did tea, herbs that we would blend with the tea. We did fresh cut flowers. We did various food crops. A lot of the herbs we would turn into essential oils or hydrosols. But the farm was basically an educational teaching farm. That was the purpose of it, to teach organic and more permaculture methodology, as well as some biodynamics, which started off as a local thing, but then spilled into working in the coffee world. My background's in coffee. I joined that, as the farm existed. And then I brought the idea of teaching coffee growers how to increase their income streams or basically retrain themselves agriculturally to look at sustainable agriculture as a viable option.
So do you have a background in agriculture?
Through college, yeah. I went to school with an enology and viticulture background to be a winemaker and potential wine grower, and was working as an internship up in Portland, Oregon in the wine industry, where I stumbled upon coffee and then was asked to get into this world and just completely fell in love with it at a really young age and never turned back. And that was in 1988. So that was quite a while ago. What
did you fall in love with? Was it the flavor? Was it the cafe experience? What was it?
The cafe experience was always interesting to me. Back then, this was pretty early in, Starbucks had 11 stores, and it was pretty new. It'd be the Italian style coffee house experience, or the beginnings of this kind of coffee as a fast food takeout thing, which was Starbucks and coffee people in these brands at the time. What I fell in love with was the agriculture side, that the similarities between wine and coffee were so apparent. There's old vine wine, there's old vine coffee. There's heirloom varieties of coffee, there's heirloom wine. The processing is somewhat similar. The growing, how you grow it, how the plant works, is very similar to a wine vine. So it was the similarities. And at the time in the 80s, when I was in college, I would graduate with an enology degree. And what you end up seeing more often than not was some family who'd made a lot of money in the stock market in the 80s, and they propped up their deadbeat son to run a winery and be the head winemaker, and basically use us as the backbone of making wine, and then they would throw their name on the bottle.
You were like
And
the ghostwriters of winemaking.
Right, exactly. And it was somewhat nauseating that was going to be my lot in life. And whereas in coffee, you didn't have that. You had this apprenticeship, that was being handed down. A lot of roasters that I met and cuppers that I met, they learned it through their parents or through, old industry connections, that they grew up, their parents worked in a factory, then they started doing it. And it was this old type of journeyman handed down. You didn't have this influx of money yet in coffee. And certainly in the growing side, you didn't have that at all. So you didn't have some fancy vineyard with a family crest on it and all this, horse shit that you see in the wine industry. Coffee was grown in very, rough, rudimentary ways. I compared it to winemaking of the 1800s, really. And that was what was fascinating to me and interesting. And what could be done? What could you bring with the wine background into coffee? And I thought the possibilities were endless.
Something that I'm finding really interesting right now is that we are starting to understand that we pretty much have just been doing coffee production and processing and that whole agricultural end of things. We have been doing it the way it's been done for generations without necessarily having progressed as much as we probably should have as an industry.
Not only would I agree with it, I would say that there has been very little to no progression. I mean, just recently you've seen this kind of the idea of, what if we started inoculating yeast strains in fermentation or enzymes? Really, it's an enzymatic change. Temperature controlling fermentation, the idea of different processing, honeys and things like that, that's a relatively new thing. And if you look at coffee processing, like fermentation, for example, in most farms, you have a wooden box that they're fermenting the coffee, open air with wild yeast getting involved. And they'll take a stick and they'll stick the stick in the coffee and they'll lift it out. And if the mucilage is sticking to the stick, it's done fermenting. I mean, there's
seriously, is that how it goes?
That's how it's done now. If you compare that to wine, I mean, that we can control that in wine. We know exactly when wine fermentation's over and we could stop it immediately. We have a long ways to go in coffee. I mean, we could be fermenting in stainless steel and temperature and pH controlled. I mean, we could have an immense amount of impact, which would then raise, and warrant the rise of coffee prices because you'd have real investments.
Yeah, that's an interesting one though, isn't it? Because farmers can't afford to do that without people paying more for their coffees to start with.
Right.
So it's like a chicken and an egg thing, right? Exactly.
Well, it is and it isn't, because the answer to that is, the equivalent of the winery vineyard relationship. If it was, my vineyard and your winery, and you said, look, I want my wine done this way, I want my grapes this way, or my grapes grown in this certain manner and processed in a certain manner, I could easily say, look, I can't afford to do that. So you would loan me the money. I would deduct every year some of that loan off my grape price, because you're going to fly my name on the bottle for a decade at least in any type of relationship like that. And that's how that advances. And in coffee, there are very few coffee roasters that have a 10-year relationship with the farm to feel confident if I loaned you $500,000 to make improvements on the farm that you're going to A, survive, B, stick around, or C, not disappear and go somewhere else. And at some point, one of us needs to take that leap of faith. And the roaster or the coffee importer is in a much better position to take that risk than a coffee farm.
Right, because they can carry that risk and they're going to be able to disseminate the risk over a bunch of different people that they're going to be selling to, as opposed to
exactly. And if the investment goes sour, you're not going to be destitute. You're not going to lose your land. You're going to survive.
Right.
Yeah.
This is so much more complicated, this whole supply chain thing, then I want to say then we've been led to believe. I used to say that up until a few weeks ago, and what I say now is then we've allowed ourselves to believe.
Right.
I feel like I've been in coffee almost like 18, 20 years. And I am only, since I had this podcast, starting to understand the sheer and utter complexity of the coffee supply chain.
Yeah.
Like
it's much more complicated.
Oh, yeah. Because you started going to Origin and trying to teach different farming practices, right? Based on what you'd learned from the growing wine, growing grapes,
wine,
not growing wine. You don't grow wine.
Growing grapes, and then really that was the initial. But what really propelled my learning was what happened at Tailor Made Farms, which I worked under a farmer named Michael Presley, who came from the Farallons Institute, which was a big green think tank, and learned, I had a master's course in a series of months working with him. I mean, he was just such a wealth of information. And it was there that I really found what coffee needed and how we can get there. And answering questions like, how can farming on a small scale, can small farmers in coffee actually make it? And they can do it, but it involves a lot of learning. It's not going to happen the way we're doing it right now. And so that's why I started going down and doing it. Well, the broken part is there's no opportunity for education. And so most of the farmers that have been growing for generations, as you pointed out, were most likely growing commercial type coffees because the specialty movement is relatively new, especially in type of modern processing that is, to me, I said earlier, not really modern, but now we're from the 1850s to the 1870s now in wine type processing. Who's teaching the farmers that there's a change happening? Nobody's doing that. So I've always felt that what we're suffering from is not a crisis of market interest and market opportunity. It's an educational crisis is what we have. We're not teaching farmers how to produce specialty, how to grow specialty, how to look at their farm as a micro enterprise, and to understand what the markets are that in the US and Europe and Australia, what they're wanting to buy so they can make their farms deliver that product. There needs to be a lot of investment in education for farmers to have that level of sophistication, and they don't. And for many roasters that are buying through importers or doing direct trade because they went to a farm, they're missing the point that the farmer is not equipped to deliver, in many cases, the product that they want. They don't have the education, they don't have the investment, they don't have the ability, the equipment on hand to produce a product that's going to rate 89, 90, whatever points you hear about in Cup of Excellence. Right now it's a lottery ticket. If they did it, they did it by accident, and they rarely can replicate it, which is a real problem.
That's an interesting thing there. There's a lot to unpack. Like, first of all, it sounds like what you're saying is, even if people, let's say today we all decided, all right, we're going to fix this, we're going to go out there and we're going to buy specialty coffee. We're going to have relationship buying, we're going to buy specialty coffee.
Sure.
We don't have enough producers that are producing specialty coffee because they don't know what the fuck they're doing.
Right. No, they don't. And so there's a scramble.
Right.
Well, and roasters will say that, I'll give you X and X premium if you can get your coffee up to 89 points. And the farmer will say, great, I'll do it. How do I do it? And the roaster can't answer that question, which is a problem because they need to answer that question. How do I get more, bergamot flavor? Or like, as Peter talked about, in the last podcast about tasting the actual flowering of the coffee. Right. Well, how do I make that happen in my coffee? You have to have an agricultural answer to that question. Otherwise, you're not doing them any help. You're just dangling money over their heads saying, if you're able to jump up high enough, you can get this money. and they're saying, okay, but I need better shoes to jump, or I need some help to get up that high.
Whatever.
And you're saying, well, figure it out. I'll let you know, when you can get up here, it's all yours.
And if it doesn't taste right, well, I'm not going to buy it.
And I'm going to disappear.
Right.
And
So
exactly.
perhaps, and something that my friend Christopher Ferran does is he goes directly to the farm, tells them what he's trying to do, and he funds consultants to work with the farmer to help them achieve the goals that they're looking for. So he'll fund an agronomist, he'll fund a microbiologist, and he pays for that. So that and the benefits to the farmer of having people flown out, paid for by the roaster, that can help this farmer improve their workflow and their work practices and agricultural practices is like life-changing.
Right. No, and that's exactly the methodology to get there. You have to back it up with that kind of a system. And I would argue that if you're going to do that, the agronomist that you hire should not be a coffee agronomist, because most coffee agronomists that are in country, the education that they have is based on
the land
increasing yield. Well, no, it's I'm going to boost your yield, which is going to then get you more income. And what you don't want to do is boost yield. You want to boost quality. And sometimes when you're boosting quality, you're lowering your yields. And it goes against their intuition. So you're better off hiring a viticulturalist, or in the case of people that are doing enzymes and yeast trials, they're working with Scott Labs of the United States. They're sending, that you actually have somebody who's producing that, showing you how to use that. Look at sustainable ag agronomists. There's the whole soil food web. Dr. Elaine Ingham, that group, is fantastic for teaching tropical crops how to increase quality, how to increase, root vitality and root systems. So you have a sustainable farm that's going to last for years, not just like in Colombia. What you see is they plant coffee trees, they last no more than 10 years. They level them, they rip them out, and they put in new ones. I mean, these trees, or these coffee trees, can last 75 years if they're well cared for. So this idea of pump it full of steroids and make it produce a lot and then get rid of it and put more in is crazy thinking, and it's what the agronomists in just Colombia are teaching, which I think is incorrect.
I was having a chat with a friend of mine who is connected with the weed industry, and they're experiencing a lot of the same thing with weed. He's like, I've only just started dabbling in smoking weed. It's legal here for anyone who's going to send me fucking crazy emails. Stop it.
Yeah.
And he said to me, if you're going to buy weed, just let me get it for you. And I smoke like maybe once every 3 weeks.
Yeah.
I'm a very novice.
Yeah.
But I'm exploring things like CBD and THC and the effects, and it's a fun look. I'm a scientist, so it's a fun exploration to go on to understand what these different particles and what these different molecules do to the brain, etc., etc., and what different strains will do. And he was having a conversation with me about the presence of mycotoxicity in weed, as well as the presence of hormones that they give different cannabis trees and different strains of cannabis in order to pump up the yields. They grow really quickly, they yield loads, and they are terrible for you.
Right. If you've ever seen if you've ever seen an indoor marijuana operation, it is like out of a 50s science horror film. They're pumping these plants full of chemicals to increase the cannabinoids and increase the resin and deepen the flowering. And the mental image of like outdoor, humble weed is a myth.
It's gone.
It is if you're growing it personally. Sure, it exists.
That's different though.
But that's it. But what you're going to see for sale is not that. And just like with strawberries, because strawberries are treated with so many layers of chemicals, 24 applications, that you should eat organic strawberries. Why would you be smoking non-organic weed? Because it is it's like you're basically smoking bodybuilders on steroids. You're just ingesting all the chemicals that go with that to hype that plant up. Yeah, at least with coffee, there's a kill point. There's stuff that's going on to where if you're drinking non-organic coffee, there's a lot of steps that's going to remove potential hazards from you.
Well, it will kill off the mycotoxin. Well, the majority of mycotoxins. It will
Right.
kill off a lot of mold, but it won't eliminate hormones, and that's a problem right there. That
Right.
I don't think. Like, I'm massively into this shit, so I think about it a lot. I think you are too, right?
Sure. Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I remember I went on the quest for when we started up Elixir. Cheers, by the way.
Cheers. Yeah.
Oh, and to steal a thing from your show, what's in your cup?
Oh, today we're doing, this is a Panama Don Bosco pre-ship sample.
Cheers.
So just something quick. Yeah.
Oh, and cheers to Dana Andrews. Thanks for introducing us, Dana.
Oh, you're welcome. She actually texted me this morning to wish me luck for this. So.
Oh, awesome. She's a great human. She's a great
she's
human.
fantastic. Yeah.
So when I was starting Elixir, somebody said to me, can you make this organic? I want to sell it in my store, and can you make it organic? And so I started asking a bunch of different roasters, some of them in Australia who had their own coffee farms, how do I go about getting organic coffee? And one of them who owned his own coffee farm in Colombia said, it's all bullshit, Lee. No one has organic coffee. I'm like, what do you mean? He said, even if it's organic and it's grown organic over there, which is highly unlikely based on the farming practices that we understand about coffee right now, he said, there are very few farms in the world that can do it. Very, very few farms in the world that can do it. And I know one of them, actually the one that sponsors today's episode of the podcast, FAFCoffees in Brazil. They have been working on organic farming for a couple of decades now. But the problem with that going into Australia is that they fumigate everything. Every single container is fumigated. Which then, even if it is organic coffee, it's no longer organic coffee if you go to the real definition of it, because you've just put chemicals all over it. It's just sprayed the containers. So
well, they would lose certification. Yeah, no, I mean, I would disagree with what he has told you because in Colombia, you have some very well-known farms. Most of the organic production in Colombia, probably when you were talking about this, was happening in Santander and Santa Marta. So quite up north. The Kogi Indians, for example, have been certified. I mean, basically, they've been organic since they started growing coffee. And you have, Mesa de los Santos, Osvaldo Acevedo's farm, which is very popular, has, the HR 61 variety that just sold at auction for $151 a pound. He's been organic since 1993, I think. And in Guatemala, you have Lake Atitlan region, is very big, Coban area in organic production. Mexico and Oaxaca and Chiapas. A lot of traditional areas have been doing it in Indonesia, in Aceh. So it exists all over the world. And it's this idea, which I think is borderline racist, of the it's in the developing world. So how do you know it's real? Well, because they have international inspection agencies there, and these countries, Europe or JAS or the United States, take this extremely serious to make these claims. So there is a system that works. Now, is there fraud within the system? There's fraud in every system, but at what scale? It's quite low. On the fumigation issue, though, yes, you're correct. Once it goes into fumigation, it's the same thing of sending coffee to Hawaii. We have to fumigate, any green coffee that we send to roasters over there. In some countries, you could fumigate using CO2, or you actually deep freeze the coffee. Right. And so at that point, you're not using really any chemicals that would be considered synthetic or banned chemical or part of the dirty dozen. But as
I understand it, with that, you have to rip open the bags, don't you, to do that?
If the bags if they're in Grain Pro,
yep.
Yeah, you have to do that. But if you're going to ship to a country that requires fumigation, you wouldn't ship in Grain Pro. You would have them put in jute bags anyways. Okay. And then the cold can flow through that. In the case of Hawaii, when we sell coffee to Hawaiian roasters, we have to actually, take the coffee out of the Grain Pro or vac packs or, however you're packing it, put it in a jute bag so everything can flow through.
Yeah, wow.
But you can deep freeze. There are ways around it. But if it were to be fumigated using, the traditional chemicals used for fumigation, it would lose its certification at that point. So, you couldn't sell it as certified in Australia.
Yeah. I mean, these are the kinds of things that I don't know that we think about the whole way through when we're saying, oh, I've got organic coffee. Well, you can't really have organic coffee if everything that comes into the port. Australian quarantine laws are ridiculously strict, ridiculously strict. And they're not going to let anything come through that isn't fumigated. So when I ask people, how are you selling this coffee as organic?
No.
Well, people don't think about this. They don't.
Well, yeah, and then with Australia, it could be that they're getting away with CO2.
Maybe.
In that case, it's fine. But I can't imagine any Australian organic certifier allowing a fumigated product to still remain certified. Yeah. I think they would decertify it immediately.
Yeah. If they knew and if they were paying attention. We'll see.
Yeah.
I've got to dig more into that one because I'm a little confused. Sometimes they look away. I mean, corruption's corruption.
Yeah, except for if it's a law countrywide. So if it's all imports to Australia have to be fumigated. I mean, it takes one podcast like this to talk about it. And then there's no more secrets. The idea of people look away. Well, there's lots of people like you that aren't looking away, and this gets viral very quickly. If people that are very concerned about organic products feel that, oh my God, this could be all based on a mountain of horse shit, it causes a lot of problems very quickly for these agencies. So,
and I feel like there's a lot that's going on respectfully. I'm about to say this. There's a lot that's going on in our industry that's with regards to the coffee supply chain that's based on a mountain of horse shit, purely because we've been looking away for so long.
Sure.
The supply chain works. Everyone's getting what they need. Do we really need to look into it and unpack what's going on and understand who's making the money, who's not making the money, who's getting ripped off? Why do we care that the majority of coffee farmers that are producing coffee in a lot of the regions south of San Diego, in caravans headed towards the border right near my place? That's really uncomfortable to think about. So do we really need to unpack this shit and start asking questions? And do we really owe anyone any explanations? Because climate change is going to shift this stuff anyway. And coffee growing regions are going to end up on different parts of the globe. So let's just wait for that to happen and then we can start asking the questions. Well, no.
Well, yeah. And I, for years, my tactic is raise the question to the people that fear it the most. And so for many years, I mean, I had an all organic coffee roasting company. That's what I had for 20 years. And I was adamant to go speak to extreme right-wing groups. I wouldn't go to like the Natural Food Co-op to speak because I already have them on board. They get it. And they, in fact, they know as much, if not more, than your average consumer already about food. What I wanted to get to was the American Legion Hall guy who's got the Trump hat on. Well, back then it wasn't Trump. And explain to him that organic and fair trade was the other thing. Address their issues. They were right-wing issues. They weren't left-wing issues. The left, it feels nice, the idea of organics. And fair trade and equitable pay for farming. It's a feel-good thing. But it really resonates with the right because it falls on their 5 pillars of fear. And so if you believed that you could win the war on drugs at the time during that whole movement, you would pay higher prices for coffee because a coffee grower won't be tempted to plant coca or opium poppies or marijuana if they're getting fair prices for their coffee. And if they're not getting fair prices for their coffee, they're not going to just roll over and die or starve to death. They're going to survive. And that could be getting in with the cartels and growing for them. And once you start that process, there's no
out.
Well, hey, coffee prices are up. Sorry, Mr. Cartel guy, I'm done planting coca this year. That's not going to work. Or they'll abandon their farms, like you said, and become part of the caravan. So if you want to win the war on drugs, you have to seek out fair trade. This is what I'm telling right-wing groups, because that satisfies your one concern. The other concern is illegal immigration. If you don't want the Mexicans to be here in California and taking all of our jobs, supposedly, then pay them fairly to grow coffee for you in the countries that they reside in, because nobody wants to abandon a beautiful 20-acre or 10-acre farm in the mountains of be a dishwasher and live in an apartment with 15 other poor bastards. That's not what they want to do. They do it because they don't have opportunity. And when coffee prices fall to where they are right now, below cost of production, you have increases in civil unrest. So you have, revolution that happens, which could leak out into civil war, which could involve U.S. troops. It leaks into kidnapping of tour business people for ransom because they're trying to make money. Everything starts to snowball. So if you don't want the world thrown into chaos, you need to pay higher prices for coffee. It's a simple thing. And so at the time I labeled it as the nickel revolution. It was for every cup that you drink, you need to be willing to pay 5 cents more per cup. 5 cents more per cup in a pound sense is $2.50 higher per pound. And in many for growers, it will double or triple their income. So if I were to come to you today and say, I have now increased your income by 3 times, it would change your life forever. And we can do that in a 5-cent tax for each of us. So if you drink 5 cups a day, it's going to cost you 25 cents more a day. If we were to do that, it would actually trump all the work, not to make a pun here.
The pun there.
It would best all of the efforts of USAID since the formation of USAID, if we just did that one act alone. So it has that level of impact on the global coffee supply.
We got to go to
Congress. And as being the
largest
well, and we have done that already. The SCAA, back during the coffee crisis in the late 90s, Peter Giuliano was a part of this as well, that we had the executive director at the time, Ted Lingle, speak before Congress on this issue, on development and how we used our development monies, and where, the idea of the U.S. pulling out of the ICO at the time was such a dangerous move, because it would increase all of these things. It's not just about a cup of coffee. You can't be so narrow-minded. It's about all of these bigger things. It's about the war on drugs. It's about illegal immigration. Yes, yeah.
Well, I think, and can't believe I'm going to say this, I think that we have the right president at the moment to hear
we do.
That.
Right, because you feed their fear.
Yeah, he is, of all the presidents that I have been learning about recently, and, this isn't the country I was born in or spent most of my life in. So all of this stuff, I'm learning what you all learned in the 2nd grade right now. But of all the presidents that I've started to learn about, this is the president where that kind of an explanation would make sense to him. He would see that as, okay, someone needs to tweet this shit to him. Maybe you and I should talk after this and we'll send him a tweet and...
Well, actually, funny enough, as I was going to switch parties to Republican because I was going to apply to be the ambassador to Nicaragua, specifically to address this issue. Forget your wall. I'll save you money by taking that wall money and guaranteeing that they'll never want to leave Nicaragua. But
nobody wants to leave their home. Nobody wants to come here where there's 350 million people or whatever it is. It's approaching that quickly, who who are aggressively fighting against each other in what I think is a passive civil war, so that everyone gets their own little piece of safety. Like you do not need to be adding to the clusterfuckery that's going on here. Nobody wants to leave their home. They want to be in their own country.
Well, and they have and their experience here when they get here is horrible. They're treated poorly. They're, like I said, they're crammed in these apartments because they're saving all their money to send out of the country, to get back home as soon as possible. These are cultures that are very family focused and family driven. And this, in their eyes, is a very cold and heartless type culture. It's not very family focused here. No. And it's not a great experience. So this idea of villainizing immigrants as they're here to just leech off of us is just factually untrue. And in my experience of working in the developing world, my entire adult life, I've never seen that example once come up. So anyway, so yeah, I was going to try to lobby to become the ambassador to Nicaragua to feed all of his concerns with fact of we can win this stuff. But it's not the way you think. It's the way we're going to win this is much easier than you think. It's to prop up the agricultural sector, which is usually the poorest sectors of these countries. It's usually where civil war starts out. It's usually where guerrilla armies are created. And
cartels, drug trades, all
right. It doesn't happen in the cities. This happens in the mountains.
I really think there's an opportunity here for the coffee industry to get onto Twitter and start bombarding Trump with this information. And he'd pay attention.
Well, especially if it's framed in the sense of we can help you, not you're wrong or you're an idiot. It's that I understand your concerns and here's how we can address them in a way that our experience tells us will work. And it's a very reasoned and measured approach. And a lot of the work I did in Colombia, Nicaragua, on various government projects happened under Bush's reign as well, because he had that same concern. And they were throwing money at projects to thwart the spread of coca throughout South America. And the sad reality is I gladly took the money and participated in the projects to help growers. But for the ones that already had planted, it was too late. Yeah. They can't reverse, even if they wanted to, because they don't necessarily want to work with these groups. They're now indentured servants to that cause in perpetuity.
I really think we could have something like this. Could be a really great idea, Mark. This is one of those things where if we can get Peter to jump in on this and the three of us.
Well, that could be the next the symposium that Peter runs. That could be the next symposium topic, speaking to Trump and his administration and how we can get it done. It can be done. It can be done as an industry-wide effort.
It's even something we could do this afternoon in the sense that we figure out what the tweet would be. We go out to our industry and say, go to the SCA Twitter and retweet what they're about to tweet to Trump.
Yeah.
And what it needs to be is a very short either video or blog post that details a very quick, simple kind of what you were just talking about. If you want to stop the migrant caravans, we need to give them a reason to stay in their countries. And the reason to stay in their countries is to give them something that's going to help them thrive and flourish and going to keep them out of having to engage in the cartels.
It's another form of farm subsidy. We pay growers in the Midwest to not grow crops many times, to stay on their farm. We're doing the same thing by saying we will pay higher prices, but that higher price premium will be a social premium that will go, that basically in the form of a subsidy to keep you growing coffee, to keep you on your farm. And the U.S. can lend agricultural assistance as far as educational assistance to build a better farm. Yeah. We're already doing this work on the ground. It's taking AID and ACDI, VOC and all these groups and saying, this is the direction, this is where we want to go with this idea. We want to build world-class farms in the developing world, so they doing this, so they don't immigrate illegally. And it's something right now we're saying well, farming is a, you know, is a rural, poor type of a pursuit in the developing world. Leave it alone. And really, it's no, we, you know, we have a lust for all these high quality foods throughout the United States and Europe and Japan. Let's teach them how to do it, because there is a true shortage of that. And as climate change is taking hold, it's going to become much more difficult to produce these high-end specialty coffees that everyone's craving at this point.
It's a really great, almost silver bullet strategy that we could construct in a single tweet that, if we retweeted it enough, could get his attention enough for him to say to one of his team, can somebody take a look at this? Because this is, I really think that we should do this.
No, I'm game. Yeah. I mean, and I think that the SCA was obviously game. They've been talking about this, you know, since the inception. So
let's, once we get off air, talk about how we would.
If this clinches my EGOT, I'm in. So yeah.
You're off to Congress to add to another one.
Yeah.
Well, we should get maybe Pete on the phone and have a conversation and say, like, listen, this is the idea. I'm sure between SCA and all of our social media contacts, we could really get the industry on board to start retweeting this. And all we need to do is shine enough of a light on it that his people start paying attention and the press start paying attention.
Just consistent messaging around that central idea, a campaign with hashtags to get people to look at all of the things that coffee affects that we're afraid of.
Yep.
And how we can solve it. And
you appeal to people's fears and egos. If there's anything being a serial entrepreneur has taught me is, and I fucking hate it. I fucking hate that the best way to sell anything is to appeal to people's fears and their egos. It just goes against everything that I stand for. But
that was my motivation for giving the speeches for the right-wing groups, is that, I can't alienate them and just say, you guys don't get it. Because then you're limiting your market potential.
Absolutely.
And the reason why, like, my father's a staunch fiscal conservative. He's not an evangelical conservative, but you know, his he has a Toyota Prius, and his reasons for driving it are different than what somebody else's reasons like on the right or the left are for driving it. But who cares what the motivation is? The fact that now they've got two of these cars in the road, and he's not driving a Cadillac, you know, belching out smoke, means we're winning. So who cares how we get there? And if it's ego, if it's fear, whatever it takes to get to the finish line, I'll play. You know, we're here to make change. I didn't join this industry just to sell coffee. That's fine. That's all well and good. But I ultimately left the wine industry to come here to make change because I felt it was possible. And since starting this in 1988 and to where I am now, I've already witnessed immense, and we can now accelerate that quite easily.
Well, especially because the technology that existed for communicating with each other in 1988 versus right now is so different. Like the fact that we can sit here, have this conversation, come up with a strategy, and then say, all right, so let's tweet the president. Let's come up with a campaign where we tweet the president and let him know about a strategy that we, as a focused group that see a solution that you perhaps aren't seeing, we could effectively put that campaign together over the next 24 hours and directly communicate with the president because we know how to attach to his ego.
Well, and if enough of us are doing it, but if it works, that's true. That's how everybody else is getting to them.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, like I was listening to NPR this morning. They have a podcast episode that comes out at 6 a.m. every morning. And it's just 15 minutes, tells you about the most relevant things that are going on. And this morning, one of the stories was about what's happening at the border just here.
Right.
And it is fucking torturous to listen to. But I force myself to listen to it as a way of understanding. Like, I do not want to turn away from the atrocities that are happening.
Sure.
Because it's important for us to build empathy with that experience, because this is history in the making, and you want to understand what your privilege is in relation to that kind of a thing. Like the fact that they have the kids' detention center has 8-year-olds looking after 6-month-olds because adults are not allowed in there.
Yeah.
The fact that they haven't had baths, the fact that they're not being given food, the fact that they're sick. These are children.
Right.
Children.
In a concentration camp.
In a concentration camp. And the thing that really fucking annoys me is that people are saying, well, they should have stayed in the country that they were in if they didn't want to live this kind of terror. Motherfuckers, if this terror is better than the terror that they were experiencing in their home country, how fucking terrible must it be there?
Well, again, it's they just don't understand. The people that say that have never been to these parts of the world and understand what they're escaping. You don't do this unless you've run out of options.
Right.
It's not like we're saying, I'm going to leave, I'm going to migrate, across the Atlantic and risk life and limb because I just want to live in Monaco. That's not why we're doing it.
No.
It's because your life's in danger, your family's life's in danger, or you're starving, or you have nothing.
And there's no hope of it changing.
And there's no assistance
soon
from the governments in these countries. We have a safety net, they don't. It's ignorance, but it's, my tactic to that is to try to enlighten and educate as best I can, rather than to just say, you're a moron, you don't get it.
Right.
Even though my gut instinct feels that at its core.
Right.
It's, not everyone, I've had the fortunate opportunity to have worked my entire adult life traveling for coffee. And it just so happens to be in these parts of the world. And I've learned a lot over the years that my 17-year-old self would have probably made that criticism as a smart ass, snarky, retort. And now it's like, well, no, because I get why these people are leaving these areas. And it's a shame because the areas are beautiful and they're incredible. And I wouldn't leave those areas personally. But they have, they don't have the resources I have to stay in those regions.
Right. And they're terrified. They're
terrified for their lives.
Listen to some of these stories.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
They've,
as a resort of being squeezed financially in the areas that they're living in, they've joined gangs, they've joined cartels just to feed their families.
Right.
And many times these women are getting raped. They don't want to be slaves anymore, so they flee, hoping for a better life for their children. And this is the only option they have left.
Right. And then we're villainizing them for it, which is
the crushing part of it. My parents are from Syria. I don't think I told you that when we talked last, but in the past 7 or 8 years, I have watched. So the village that my family are from is one of the very few Christian villages in Syria.
Mm-hmm.
And as you can imagine, as the war was happening over the last 7 or 8 years, this village was prime.
Sure.
It was prime killing ground, or a prime target for ISIS. And so the country was decimated. And, I don't know how, but our village, because there was a missile manufacturing factory, I guess you call it, right by our village, the government surrounded our village with tanks. And so you couldn't go in, you couldn't leave unless you had a reason. And unless you could prove that you lived in the village, you weren't allowed in. So by some stretch of luck, and, the patron saint of my parents' village is St. George and St. Elias. And they often say it's because of these saints. And, Syria is such an ancient civilization anyway, that it's very heavily steeped in this kind of mysticism.
Sure.
And so our village was left primarily untouched by some luck. But it wasn't economically untouched. And so there is so many people leaving Syria, as we know, over the last few years, going to Europe and risking their lives and coming here to the US and to Canada and anywhere they can go, Australia, anywhere that will take them. Not because people want to leave Syria.
No.
Nobody wants to leave Syria. They don't want to. Like, the trajectory the country was on with this president, and I'm neither pro-Assad or against him, but the trajectory the country was on was he was trying to move the country into a new economic era. So Syria is primarily built on this idea that we manufacture everything that the country needs from within the country. And so he's educated from outside. And when his father passed, he became the president. And it's a inherited political system, right? And so he's trying to do things like, and this is right when the Arab Spring unleashed, right at the beginning of it, his father hadn't let the internet and social media be something that was available to everybody. The moment the Arab Spring happened, that's when he opened it up for everybody. And he said,
well, and he was, he was a Western educated, but he was an ophthalmologist,
correct.
Right?
He's an ophthalmologist, and his wife, who, of course, the press hasn't publicized this, but she's going through breast cancer right now. She's going through chemotherapy, and she's still working and trying to advocate for all women to get in Syria to get breast exams and do all of that. Like, it's nowhere near the dictator kind of horror story that the press is trying to make it out to be.
Yeah.
And this idea that these filthy Arabs just want to leave there so that they can get a better life somewhere else because it's a shithole country. Right. It's just simply not like that.
Right.
This is an ancient civilization that is trying to grow up with a president that is trying to give the country the means to do that in a thoughtful, considered way. So, someone gave me an analogy about this. It's like giving teenagers all the freedom that they could have when they're adult once they turn 13. It's not healthy not to give people boundaries. But these people have been so oppressed from the previous president, they're giving them all of the freedoms that they should have available to them all at one time could cause absolute and utter chaos.
Yeah.
And so hearing that this president was being considered in the way that he was rolling this out was really impressive to me. Like, sure, there was a bunch of shit I didn't agree with, but I do agree with the fact that this person was being quite considered in the way that this was happening. And then to see the civil unrest unfold as it was, and to see so many people leaving Syria that, listen, my cousin's husband walked from his front door to Austria in Syria. So he walked. It took him 3 months from his front door in the village of Zerdan in Syria to Austria in 3 months. Once he got there and was able to petition for his wife to come, it took her 3 hours.
Yeah.
To travel the same journey. It took him 3 months to walk. Nobody wants to do that.
No.
You're a broken human by the time you get there. These people don't want to leave their coffee farms to do the same fucking thing.
Right.
And it's heartbreaking that we can't change that. It's heartbreaking that we're having a fucking conversation on this side of the supply chain that says, I don't want to pay $1.15 per pound or $2.15 per pound because I just want to pay $1.05 per pound.
Right.
These people need us, and we don't know what the solutions are.
Well, yeah, they need us, and I think that the solutions so far have been, we'll direct trade, or we're going to just throw, we're going to buy micro lots, and we're going to buy heirloom. We jumped the gun to instantly, turn these people into artisan farmers in our minds, or we could pay them the amount of that, but they were ill-equipped to become that. And then, you may have paid them these prices 1 or 2 years because they got lucky and produced a great crop. And then as soon as reality set in, these buyers disappeared into the woodwork. And the real response is to create a movement to teach them how to do it better. I do think that the market will bear the price. I've always believed that. I've believed it for quite some time, because you see in things like Cup of Excellence, or, we deal with, numerous roasters that want to go in and buy, all of these small lots of Kenya. And what I hear from the small roaster is, I want just the best. I don't care what it costs. Just tell me what's the best Kenyan coffee. I want to buy that lot. So there's this scramble by all these small coffee roasters out there to make their name by sourcing all these great products. And they're throwing money at the idea to get there. And if you could channel that in a more healthy way, like, well, then let's just build a better farm. Like, forget this scramble to buy the best. Let's just build the best, and we can do it if you want to be committed to this idea. Yeah. And when the movement gets started, the big boys want to play too. They hate being left out. And a prime example of that is when the Clover machine was out. I don't know if you remember that machine.
Oh, fuck
so
yeah.
Remember that?
It made
so everybody
no sense to me.
No, nor did it me either. But you had all of the, the Stumptowns and Intellis and all these guys buying this machine and getting a lot of press. And on top of the idea that they were direct sourcing, and Starbucks was getting increasingly annoyed that, why is Intelli getting all this attention? Why is Stumptown? We're Starbucks. We're the massive. So what did they do? They bought the company and took the toy away from them.
Absolutely.
Thinking that was going to mean, oh, now Starbucks has street cred because they've got a Clover in the reserve stores. No, it didn't. The
Nobody
market
knows
just shifted.
what a Clover is now.
Right. Nobody knows what a Clover is. And they moved into hand drip and all this other stuff. So the innovators just keep moving. They keep shifting it and going from one thing to the other. But the big boys want to play. Now you have Nestle buying Blue Bottle, and you have JAB owning Intelli and Stumptown. So they'll support this idea because they want to play as long as they see a movement's happening. But we have to create the movement, and then they'll follow. Being the serial entrepreneur, you have to create the market demand, and then they come in. Yeah.
Well, I definitely think that, like, if we put our heads together and just come up with the base strategy of this, getting it to go like wildfire isn't going to be difficult.
No. Because a lot of us agree on that. Most of us in the specialty industry agree. What we're struggling to do is come up with a plan of attack. And the plans of attack so far that I've seen address such a small segment. It's not enough to create any change. No. And so something like this is an opportunity to create change.
And everyone can play. Like
everyone can play.
It's not like this is just for specialty or this is just for the big boys. This is something that benefits everybody. It benefits the whole entire complex coffee supply chain. Everyone
for different reasons.
Right.
Yeah, they all have their own things, their own needs are being met, but they're all different needs. For my dad, it's, well, I get to keep the immigrants back and whatever. That's why I'm going to buy this coffee. Well, that's great. If that's your motivation, go for it.
Exactly.
No problem.
Because the immigrants want that too. The immigrants want to be back home.
They agree with you on that one. Yes.
Yeah, they may not agree with you on your motivation behind why you want to do that. But that, again,
the core idea is agreed upon. Yeah.
Right. And I definitely think, as I was saying before, like, this is the right commander-in-chief to implement something like this. It appeals to the way he does business.
Right.
He's an economics-driven. Well, he's not even an economics-driven person. He's a supply chain-driven person.
And where fear and conspiracy and rumor play such a large role in his life, and that he could open up a consuming audience of millions of people to look at a product that they've never even thought about before is where the change happens. That all of a sudden you have all of these MAGA hat wearing people's buying fair trade coffee would be unbelievable. And it could, and he could spark that because it's his solution to a problem that he's struggling with.
We really could do this. This is not a stretch at all.
It's very easily done.
Yep.
And I think that it's within our grasp to do it within his term. And if he gets reelected, and then it just doubles down on our effort to complete the project. Because you're right, during like Obama's time, there is not a motivation for him to do this because he doesn't see he doesn't have the same motivations. It's speaking to a liberal audience who already understands all this. They get it. But it's not enough to make the change that we need. And Obama couldn't speak to the right wing to get them to start looking at this.
No. And the other thing is that these are the people who are so Trump's audience are the ones who are primarily, from what I've experienced in this country anyway, they're the people that don't see the value in buying commodity products at a reasonable price.
No, they don't want that. They want exclusive, special.
Right. They want
and they have
the exclusive shit, and they'll pay nothing or as little as they have to for the easy to get stuff.
Right. But if it's solving their fear, they'll pay extra.
Yeah. And I guess my journey as an entrepreneur, I look at, I think business is a beautiful, creative journey, much like a vision quest. I just got done talking with somebody who I hope is about to join my team, excuse me, about the way that I want to approach sales for my company. And I want to approach it in a very different way than I've seen anyone do it, in that I want it to be approached like creating an album.
Right.
I want to look at it as we want to define the story that we want to explore. We want to define the journey we want to go on, like a vision quest. And it will teach us everything we never wanted to know about ourselves. It will expose every kind of fear that you have. And that's what a true vision quest journey should do. It should put you as uncomfortable as possible.
Sure.
So that you can push yourself to your limits and have a new baseline.
Right.
And I find these kinds of endeavors so beautifully evolutionary, in the sense that we do this, we see what comes of it, and we start to challenge our own perspectives of how we see the right and how we see the left. And I think that these are really great moments to create common ground, even if it comes from a different perspective. Like, okay, these people don't want brown people here.
Right.
I just want to see brown people happier and safer and living better lives than they can. That doesn't mean that the right wing isn't going to see the opportunity that could be created from this for people to find harmony in their lives.
Sure.
And I'm being challenged in my journey as an entrepreneur at the moment to perhaps consider things from a more conservative perspective, because I'm not that person. I am hugely empathetic, and as an Arab, was taught to put everyone ahead of myself.
Right.
And that does not serve you in business.
No, it does not.
And so going through this beautiful vision quest that is creating businesses and the journey ahead of me, it is like, excuse me, hey, lady, fucking wake up. Like, it can't be roses and peaches all the time. Like, you've got to make some hard decisions, and you've got to make some shit about you. Like, you've got to make it about making money and the kind of enterprise and empire that you want to build that sustains you and generations to come, like both as a legacy, a financial legacy, and as an information legacy.
Sure.
And
sometimes you have to go to war, and you have to be brutal because your competitors want you out of the game. And to build the reality you want, or to build the future you want, you have to fight for that sometimes. And I struggled with that as well as a roaster. I tried to have, these harmonious relationships with my competitors, saying, well, we have differences, which makes us more ability to bond on bigger ideas.
Yeah.
And in this region, some got it, like Thanksgiving Coffee. He and I traveled together, Paul Katzef, for years. And then others are just like, where is the snake in this story here?
Right.
Because I'm not really trusting what you're telling me. And they were very suspicious of my motives. And the thing is in Northern California, there was a large audience for specialty coffee, and not a lot of coffee companies at the time. There were plenty of customers for us. So this idea that we had to pit ourselves against each other was foolish. We didn't have to do that. But your inclination is to do that. So I had to learn that the hard way. I mean, people that I thought were my friends in the industry at the time, I found out were not. And it was unfortunate because you don't always have to be vicious and brutal to make it in this industry. But sometimes you do have to. It's a method of survival.
How did you deal with that? Because I'm struggling getting my head around both of those concepts. The fact that, it's difficult coming to an industry where I feel a lot of people are pretending to be everything's cool, mate, and we all love each other and hold hands and sing kumbaya.
Right. Yeah.
And the first opportunity they're going to get ahead of you, they're going to fucking take it.
Yeah, and if that includes stepping on your head to do that, they're going to do it. So be it.
Yeah.
Yes.
How did you deal with that? How did you deal with that learning process?
Well, I'm very competitive by my nature. I've been involved with, various sports and physical kind of things my entire life. So the competitive side, as well as in business and other things, I have no problem with that. I think that I tried to appeal to people's better natures and reason to a fault where I wasn't willing to address that part of it. Or I was thinking that part's like kind of small thinking, and we can get around it and get to this place together. Like, instead of us being competitors, let's find out where we're different, and I'll bolster your strengths, and in turn you would do mine. And what ended up happening was I would bolster your strengths and get you business, and you would be like, screw you, mate. You go off and do your own thing.
Oh, I absolutely can relate to that.
Then I was crushed, and then I'm like, okay, well, if that's the rules, then I can be that guy too. And then I would race into that. So I became a nasty competitor to some people. I am willing to admit that. And had, did some things that, in retaliation for, being hurt basically by somebody not wanting to entertain my idea of harmony. I retaliate in ways that, in the long run, I'm probably not proud of myself, but it was a method for my business to survive at the time.
I hear a lot of people say to me, fuck this business. Like, everyone's out for themselves.
Meaning coffee, the coffee industry.
Oh yeah. Absolutely not in podcasting. I tell everybody, start a podcast. Like, the more everyone's like, oh, there's too many coffee podcasts. No, there's not enough good coffee podcasts.
Right. No,
start a podcast. Let me help you do it. Let me, I'll sit there and help you set it up. We need more good conversation.
Sure.
I'll go on anybody's podcast that wants me to come and help them start that up, just because it's important to cultivate more great conversation. This is not where the problem is. No. Where the problem is in our industry is that people are willing to fuck each other over so that they can win the business, but they're not doing that in a smart way. When you're starting to do this, like, you're going to undercut somebody else. You're going to sell them the same coffee that somebody else is selling, and you're going to sell it cheaper, and you're going to give them more equipment.
Right. No, that's a whole slippery slope, and it never works. Yeah. And in the long run, what I keep leaning on, what I do appreciate about our industry, is that it is very small and it's very incestuous. So for the most part, we all know each other, and there's very few of us that leave this industry permanently. I mean, those of us that I remember in the in the mid 90s going up in the industry are still here, and it keeps us honest. And so you can only fuck somebody over so far before everybody knows and everybody remembers, and it gets difficult for you in the long run. So you may get one over to get a short-term gain, but in the long run, you're going to regret it. And then at the end of the day, are you going to stand up in an audience of your peers and be proud of your business and your accomplishments if that's the way that you got there, was just by being brutal and nasty and mean? It's going to eat you up, and you don't have to do it that way. Prime example, of the memory of this industry is the Kona Kai scandal that happened in, I want to say 97, where they were fraudulently selling Panamanian coffee as Kona, and people were buying it. And, there was a conspiracy involved and multiple people involved, and one guy got taken down, went to prison, and then he got out of prison and tried to re-enter the industry, and everybody knew who he was. And they're like, we're not going to buy anything from you. And so now he's in the natural foods industry because he got flushed out. So this is an industry that does self-police, and that's one of the great positives of it, is that you can't get too nasty here. There are prices to pay for that.
Who was the guy that, I'm terrible with names, the guy who was running 4Barrel?
Jeremy Tooker.
Yes. So he, with all the mess that happened with 4Barrel, if anyone doesn't know what it is, go look it up. I'm not going to talk about it here, but it involves, he's essentially the Harvey Weinstein of our industry. And I'm happy to say that. And if anyone wants to, there's a bunch of press around it, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, no, there's plenty of press around it. Yeah.
Right. So I was going to be working, so the publicist I was going to have for Elixir, we were working, getting ready to launch with her, when the 4Barrel team, without Jeremy, were trying to rebrand after they'd hired Harvey Weinstein's actual publicist.
Oh boy, there's a good hire.
What makes you think that? Like, all right, so we've got the Harvey Weinstein from the coffee industry. The best thing we can do is hire the actual Harvey Weinstein's publicist and have him on the podcast. Anyway, so I couldn't work with her anymore. I love her, but I just could not work with her given that she was going to represent these people. What I did find out, though, is that Jeremy is now opening, if he may have already opened it, another coffee company. Another roasting company.
Well, but that may be true, because he still maintained ownership in there's another company in San Francisco where he did the bread, the bread baking and coffee. They sold 4Barrel. He never let go of that. So he maintained ownership the whole time. And that place is as busy as ever. The name of the company is slipping my mind, but he had owned it all along, and it never stopped owning it. So he may try to re-enter coffee as a pure coffee person, but again, in the day and age of the internet and podcasts and we don't forget things. It will be incredibly difficult for him to get anywhere in this industry.
In this industry, yes, I agree with you. Yeah. But now with mechanism, and it's why I have no problem talking about it publicly, is because I want, this is one of those situations where what he did was fucking atrocious, and we need to shine a light on known sexual deviance in our industry, because I've got to tell you, as a woman, it is really scary to operate in this industry. There is the number of situations, and I've spoken publicly about them, where like I was thrown up against a fridge by a cafe owner, bullied countless times, men asking if I want to punch on because they felt intimidated by me. Like all of this shit that doesn't need to happen in our industry and shouldn't happen. But the reason it does happen is because we're not shining enough of a light on it. And so this is why I maintain my I'm sure I'm going to get in trouble for it one day, and I don't fucking care, because if I'm speaking about it, hopefully other people are becoming aware of it and are getting the courage to speak about it. My problem with this situation with Jeremy is that now that we have online stores and we have, this way of being able to create businesses that really can bypass the main industry. He can buy direct from farms. He can establish relationships. He can have other people buy on his behalf. There are green buyers that will happily sell to him. You mean
green importers that will sell to him? Yeah.
That will sell to him happily. At the end of the day, sales quotas are sales quotas. And so he does have a mechanism for doing this. And as much as I would like to think that the industry is as protective of itself as it makes out to be, the more honest I get with myself, and the less delusional I get about how great coffee people are, the more I realize, at the end of the day, if your pockets are deep enough, you can get people to do anything for you in this industry.
As in any industry, that's true.
Not just this industry, but we seem to think that we're this separate, sanctimonious kind of, ultra left-minded people who are all about doing the right thing. Some people are.
I yes and no. I mean, I was trying to form the words and not have this sound horrible. And if you've listened to my podcast, I'm constantly doing that, saying the wrong thing. It ends up in the cutting room floor.
I really enjoy your podcast. And anyone who hasn't checked it out, go find The Exchange.
Yeah.
It is a really great discussion that's had about subjects that mean something. It's not just about regurgitating the same shit that everybody talks about on coffee podcasts.
I hope not. Yeah.
No, I really enjoy it. I'm gonna keep listening. I found it because you were coming on this podcast, and I'm like, no, this is a podcast I want to listen to as somebody who is hopefully, adding to the conversation through this podcast. I want people to listen to your podcast.
Well, it's funny because I got a text last night from Todd Mackey, who is my co-host. Like, what's this? You're going solo? You're going on a pod? And I said, look, it happens. Sometimes it happens. So tomorrow we're recording tomorrow. I'm sure this is going to come up in the thing. But my original point with Jeremy, I mean, to bring a little perspective of that liberal side that you're talking about, is that when he started in the industry, and during that time, his company, as well as a handful of other companies, almost mirrored what was happening in the skateboard movement with companies, where the whole marketing was kind of a fuck you to the mainstream, and we're alt culture, and we do things differently. And if you looked at skateboard magazines in the 90s, and it was very misogynistic and probably just as rife with issues going on, but they wore it as a badge of pride that's the way they, nude women on the covers, and just kind of degrading humor, and so he grew up in that culture, and the early marketing of Four Barrel was no different than any skateboard brand at the time. The problem is that times changed, and he didn't read that and kept that behavior going. I believe that was the culture from day one there. And I believe that many coffee companies operated in a very similar manner. They just haven't been called out on it yet.
Right.
And when the shoe dropped on that story, a lot of us felt, who've been in the industry for a long time, boy, you're going to see a lot of dominoes start to fall. And it didn't happen. It didn't happen. Yeah.
And this is where I got so angry. And if that publicist is listening to this, I'm sure I'm going to end up getting a phone call, because when the Four Barrel thing happened, I called her, and I don't mean the Four Barrel thing where she had them as a client. No.
Right.
When the Four Barrel stories dropped, I called her and said, you represent the majority of major coffee companies as a publicist, and you're a fucking great woman. And I think you and I should team up and create some sort of a campaign.
Yeah.
That even if we can't get people to admit what's come before now, we need to school these companies on how they need to act into the future.
Yeah.
She was so excited because she is a good woman. And I think that taking on board the whole 4-barrel thing, she was saying to me that because 2 of the owners remained.
Yeah.
And they still remain. And she said they didn't know what was going on. And I'm like, bullshit.
Right.
I'm sorry. If the greater industry knew what was going on, there's no fucking way that 2 of the owners didn't know what was going on.
Mm-hmm.
And if it's systemic, the fact that it was allowed to continue just because profit and loss statements were looking great, I'm sorry, that's not good enough. We need to stamp out that behavior. And this is, there seems to be a theme, like business is doing well, so we won't look at the shitty undercurrent of what's going on.
Well, but I think today, in any business, that those days are long gone, because it's becoming too easy to out that stuff, and you become celebrated for it once you get it out in the open, and people have been taken down, and in every industry. So I believe at one time that's true. I think that when profits were rolling and people were making money, they turned a blind eye to a lot of this behavior. But I don't think you can get away with that anymore. I think that those days are long gone. But again, I keep going back to the time, the idea of heavy metal, rock star excess, Now, can you imagine being in a metal band now and trying to, what are you selling as your image? It's not drunken girls partying in hotel rooms, because that's like, whoa, we can't, do that. And so a lot of these industries mimic that as a selling point. To be alternative to the mainstream was a way to get your brand out there. And that avenue's closed permanently.
Did you ever watch Entourage?
Oh yeah. I mean, not a ton of it, but yes, I've seen enough of it.
I'm watching it at the moment. I'm up to season 6, I think. And as I'm watching it.
You've watched 6 seasons of this show.
Yeah. Well, they're half-hour episodes, so it's
that's true. You could get through it.
It's an endeavor, let me tell you. But the interesting, so I used to live in LA. This is my second time living in America. And my 2 years living in LA made me swear that I'd never live in America again. Obviously, it didn't work out that way, but
right. And that's not a very good indicative of the United States as a whole. That
exactly.
region, yeah,
right. Because LA is a bubble, and I've said this on this podcast before. It's a unique shithole bubble. The kind of people, it's transient. Nobody that lives in LA is from LA, particularly the kind of LA city kind of perspective.
Sure.
We're not talking about the valley, but we're talking about West Hollywood and Highland Park and Echo Park and, Silver Lake and all of that kind of thing. And I'm watching this and I'm looking at the way that they've gone behind the scenes of the music and the movie, particularly the movie and TV industry. And this was 2007 era.
Right.
Way before Harvey Weinstein was outed publicly, last year. But it very much looks at what the real life way that movie stars and their support teams operated with regards to women and the way that they treated everybody in the industry. And it's fucking atrocious.
Right. I mean, in many ways, that show was doing the outing. They just weren't naming names. They were writing it based on experiences of probably Harvey Weinstein and people that they have come across.
Well, I think that there was talk that Ari Gold's character is based off Harvey Weinstein.
Oh, really?
Which is weird because he never cheats on his wife and he never. But I'm sure that there's a bunch of, you take different elements of each person's personality and attribute it to different characters and spread it out, and I'll take a little bit of this person and a little bit of that person, put it into this character. But as I'm watching Entourage, I'm thinking, this shit is so true. Like, this is not made up shit. Like, I know from my experiences of I lived in Hollywood, right on Hollywood and La Brea, right in the middle of the clusterfuck. And I was in the music industry, and the things that the propositions that were made to me that made me just sick were why I left. I just couldn't operate in that world anymore.
Right.
But it's so true. And a lot of people that I knew happily took those propositions with the understanding that the things that would come in return would be worth it.
Right.
And of course, it never happened. You know, the record deals that were promised for people and the auditions that were promised and all of that never eventuated. And it's just really interesting to see how that was playing out in this TV show. And now the industry isn't putting up with it. Have you heard of intimacy directors?
No.
So this is a new thing. As a result of the Me Too movement, movie sets and television sets are now hiring what's called an intimacy director.
For sex scenes.
For sex scenes and intimate scenes with intimacy in them, where there's any kind of touching. An intimacy director is being insisted on by a lot of the female staff, so that if they're uncomfortable doing a particular scene, the intimacy director can coach the actual director on how they can capture the shot without necessarily having to have the kind of intimacy that the director wants to capture.
Sure.
Which is awesome. And I was thinking about that when I heard about it and thought, I wonder if we could find something similar to that in our industry. But not necessarily an intimacy director, but somebody that could help
I hope not.
a lot of the aggression that seems to exist in our industry, to help channel that to be a little more balanced with regards to empathy than necessarily this harshness that tends to exist in a lot of the workplaces that I've seen and worked in. And I've worked in cafes in America, in London, and in Sydney, Australia. And it's not just found in one country. Like, this seems to be something everywhere.
Right. Well, if you look at over the weekend online, the
Slate,
and then I'm trying to think of the name of the group that
Baristas at Large.
Yeah, Bronwyn Cerna. I saw her in a picture, and Brandon Weaver. Like that. That's exactly what you're talking about. Yeah. Groups that rally around people that, you know, have been maligned and raise to their defense and raise awareness. I mean, just in 3 days, you knew the name and I knew the name.
Yep.
And frankly, the whole story hasn't even come out yet, but we all know about it already. So, you know, is this already happening? Maybe we already have, you know, through various mechanisms, this intimacy coach in our industry right now. Now, where does this go in the long run? I don't know, but for the meantime, I think people are finding, you know, the ones that are being maligned are finding a way to get their voice out, and they're being heard, and they're being heard quickly. And you know, the repercussions are swift on these companies. So, yeah, it's an interesting time we're in. You know, I remember when Michael Weissman wrote the book God in a Cup. I had played a small part in that book. Peter, a much greater part. But she was, when her line of questioning was starting to touch on this, and this was way before any of this stuff had you know, been brought out into the light. But I remember her asking me a lot of specific questions about specific people and trying to get somebody to say something of substance for her to have confirmation on her rumors. And so it's not like this is, you know, new, that this has been bandied about forever. I mean, Erna Knudsen, her career, you know, she tells the story numerous times of being a woman in a male-dominated, import world, and how she fought her way out of it, and the stuff that she tolerated in the work environment, going back to the 1960s was unbelievable. And we can't even hold a candle to that now. And to the point where she got into real power and started buying companies and firing people, who was doing this. I mean, she carried out, revenge on a business sense. And it was, why she became the icon that she is today.
I'm very much looking forward to having my opportunity for that. I cannot fucking tell you.
Well, it can happen.
It's a driving motivator for me.
As it should be.
Because it would be different if the reason it was being done was justified. But the reason a lot of this shit is done is purely because people have a perceived power over other people.
Right.
Who have something that they want.
Right.
And that's where it becomes an unfair playing field. If I have something that you want and I don't want to give it to you, whether it be sex or whether it be a position of power. So, I may be the head barista and you want to be the head barista. Or I have more people's respect, or whatever it is. If I have something that you want and you're not prepared to go through the usual channels to get there, and you're like, fuck this, I can take this. I am built as a man and I'm stronger than you. And so I don't want to do the hard work to get to where you are. I'm just going to fucking flatten you.
Right.
That's when it's like, okay, it's not going to be okay.
Right.
This is, and I know I can't do anything about it right now. You have completely crushed me. But bitch, one day I am absolutely going to be very happy to say fuck you.
Yeah. Well, and think about, I was on the board of the IWCA for a while, the International Women's Coffee Alliance. And I mean, think about what women at origin having to put up with in that industry. I mean, from the farm forward, milling and coyotes and exporters, it's all male dominated. And coffee farming traditionally wasn't something a woman did. It was, in the traditional family roles in these countries, usually women got into coffee farming because, in the case of Nicaragua, husbands died during the Civil War and they had this land during land reform, and it's make this happen or starve to death. Those are your options. Yeah, wow. So they had to figure it out, and not having a lot of assistance or help and men on the sidelines waiting for them to fail to take over the land or I'll help you, but you're going to become a second wife to me. And that they carved themselves out of that and now that the IWCA is this global organization that's holding women together and helping them, you can rely on a woman in Zambia to help you if you're in Colombia, is incredible. And, I sympathize with what we have to put up with in the work environment the United States and Europe and Japan, but in the developing world, it's horrific what they have to tolerate.
I'm sure.
or endure many times. And I mean, my eyes were propped wide open during my time on IWCA. It was, I was extremely flattered that they asked me to be on their board, and I received an immense amount of value from my time on that.
There was I'm a firm believer that the way that we're going to fix the way that women are treated is through men. I don't think.
Well, again, it's the same thing as the Trump argument. You can't go insular and just rely on each other, because then you're alienated the second side, and you're never going to create a healing. You're going to just keep the tension going. That you have to appeal to men's better nature to understand what role they've been playing all this time, and how they can help get us, to more of an equilibrium here. Yeah.
And being part of the solution. There's a really great story from a mosque in Sydney. And I may get some of the details wrong here, but it's the general gist of the story. One of the doctors in the local area who was seeing a lot of Muslim women who were coming in battered had gone to the sheikh of the mosque and said to him, we have a real problem. there is an increased amount of domestic violence happening in the community because a lot of these men think that it's their right to hit these women.
Mm-hmm.
And we have to fix this because women are dying or ending up like disabled because of it. And so the sheikh called a meeting that Friday and told every man in the community that attended that mosque that it was mandatory. They had to be there.
Mm-hmm.
And they had to get extra speakers and extra everything for this. The mosque was overflowing. And that day he decided to tell them that laying a finger on your wife in harm is deemed haram by the Quran. And in one day, he fixed the domestic violence issue in that community with one statement. And I draw a lot from that. In understanding, I come from a male-dominated world, both in what I was raised and in the industries that I've worked in. The music industry is as male-dominated as the coffee industry is.
Yeah.
And I have to work 100 times harder to get anywhere that it doesn't matter how much skill I have or how much hard work I have. I've accepted that I have to work 100 times harder for no fucking reason.
Sure.
And the number of times people have said to me, Elixir would have done so much better right from the get-go if it was a man that owned it. Okay. Great. I finally get it. I understand it. And it's true. It's absolutely true, but that doesn't mean that that's going to be how it eventuates. I just have to be more creative.
And plenty of women in this industry have done that, and they've succeeded. Despite of having to work that much harder.
Right, exactly. And I draw a lot of inspiration from those women, and I try and talk to as many of them as possible so that I can draw even more inspiration from them on a regular basis. What I took from that situation with the doctor and the sheikh was that they saw an opportunity to play to the weakness as a strength. That if you can find an ally that thinks outside of the scope of the problem, they are a solutions-based person that thinks rationally. Like, there is no rational reason why men should be hitting women for any reason.
No.
Right? There's nothing that a wife should do that could ever, unless she is fucking hitting somebody, if you're physically protecting yourself against someone, I understand why you think that you can lay a hand on a woman, but you still can't lay a hand on a woman. You need to get out of that situation, right?
Right.
But the solution to a lot of this stuff is through men. Women have been doing their part to try and fix this for a long time. And I think, and a lot of what I'm trying to achieve with Map It Forward with regards to this subject is like, how do we help men understand that we don't have to be working against each other? We can find a solution that works for everybody.
Right.
Why do you think that we didn't see the dominoes effect we should have seen after the 4-barrel thing happened?
Well, fear is the big one of repercussions. And, if you started taking down big names, what was going to be the repercussions of that? I don't think you had the support system that you had in like Hollywood when people came forward. I think we're still a little ways away from that to where people have the confidence to do that. But that day is definitely coming. Mm-hmm. But at that time, that was the first time we had heard that. And the people that were in support were people were shocked. Throughout the industry, we were all shocked, but there wasn't a group saying, we're here to help the workers of this company that went through this. You had this PR thing that happened, and then you had the two owners saying they were going to turn over ownership. So I got tickle in my throat here. They had this kind of very bizarre answer to the problem. first they were going to change the name of the company, then the name never changed. Then their ownership was going to be doled out, and that I don't think that ever happened.
Well, they did change the name for a minute. They changed it to Tidal.
For a minute, and then it came back.
And then they got this new publicist, and she said, that's fucking stupid. Change it back. And so they did change it back.
Which was the weirdest PR move I've ever seen in my life. Yeah.
All of it seems very strange.
I'm going to excuse myself one second, get some water. I'll be right back.
No problem at all. I will take this opportunity to tell you guys that if you haven't checked out FAFCoffees, please go and check them out. One way that you can support this podcast is by supporting our sponsors. And also, if you are a cafe owner, please head to mapperforward.org/webinars and go check out the webinar that we've just put up, the webinar bundle. It is really great. If you can't afford consulting, to get a coffee consultant to come in and help you set up your cafe, this is a really great option to get you kicked off. It'll be valuable to you for a couple of years, and then it's $99 and you'll have full access to it. So go ahead and do that. Mark, are you good?
Perfect. Yes,
great.
Good. So, yeah, I mean, I think that at that time when that came out, there wasn't that. Getting back to the PR thing, that was the strangest move I'd ever seen. And
which
what
part?
It left,
the changing the name or changing it
the
back?
The changing the name, then changing it back. Then the ownership was kind of ambiguous. Then it all kind of just went away, and there wasn't any end to the story. So I think because of that weird story arc, it made people concerned. Well, justice wasn't served, other than we outed a person and ruined one person's life, but we certainly didn't change the culture of a company.
No.
And there was no evidence of that. Now, that may have happened internally, but we don't know that. So what would make you speak out now at your company?
Right.
Because,
And I had this conversation with the publicist when she said to me, look, Lee, they're bringing me in to help change the culture of the company because it's, it's not a systemic problem. It was a him problem. So the industry needs to accept that 4Barrel's changing. And I'm like, 4Barrel hasn't apologized.
Right.
It hasn't paid its dues to the industry.
Well, claiming you didn't know is not apologizing.
No.
You get it.
Yeah. You need to have a fucking open conversation, which is why I think that anyone moving forward, I've contacted the guys from that walked out on Slate. And
right.
I think that a big part of this is coming to the table and having a conversation and talking about your perspective. So I want the employees that walked out to come on here and have a conversation, and we're working on setting that up. And then I want to have a separate conversation with Slate publicly here on the podcast so that we can unpack what's happened and so that we can hear both perspectives. And again, because this is unedited and because it is live, you can have that and make it believable. And
sure,
I'm the kind of person who's not going to let you get away with anything.
Right.
I'm so surprised by that.
No, I think that'd be fantastic. Now, whether or not they'll do it is a different story. I think the workers would do it, but the company is going to be, I mean, obviously their statements thus far has been very protected, and what companies do when these things happen is not say a lot, but acknowledge that, there's something going on.
Yeah. And I haven't reached out to Slate yet. That's on my list to do today. But I want to make sure that if you want to have a forum to have an open discussion, like this is the place to do it, because you can't hide behind anything here. And
no,
I don't have a side. I'm on nobody's side. I want to have an open, honest conversation with people that holds people accountable for what their role is in stuff. And it's okay to say, hey, listen, we didn't know any better, but this is what we're doing to fix it now. And I want to understand it because we're in a very strange time when it comes to movements. Like the left is very good at mobilizing. And when you've only got one side having a voice and the other side is like, well, we're just going to shut the fuck up and wait for this shit to blow over.
Which is what they're doing now.
Right. And that's not the way to approach it, right?
Right. Right. And it works for them because, again, who talks about 4-barrel now? Nobody.
Right. No.
It's gone away.
Right. And that's why I was shocked when I found out he was opening another roasting company. Brand new name,
I have
everything.
not heard that. Did you know the name of this group?
No.
Or
I wish I did.
I can't imagine it will last or work. I mean, I just don't see it happening. People will be relentless from the day he opens.
Well, if he didn't put his name to it, how would people know?
Because you'll know he's part of the ownership team. That's all you need to know. That's all public. Well, it is when you file for your.
Yeah, well, you need to go looking for it, right? And
yeah, but you know how many reporters want to have a follow-up to this story? They're waiting for this. I mean, people are watching every move he's making right now. And that's why I'm surprised he would do that. It would be a very weird time to be coming back.
Hey.
Or, if he came back in, France, I could understand that. But not in San Francisco.
It'll be interesting to see how this plays out. I mean, if he goes and opens up where the culture is that treating women this way is okay, he'll clean up.
Yeah.
Then predators like that know how to manipulate situations and do this kind of shit. Do you know that there's a blacklist that exists?
In the industry? No, I don't. And I certainly hope I'm not on it. No, I've never heard this. Seriously, there's a blacklist of what?
In the very early episodes of this podcast is about 14 months old.
Okay.
And in the very early episodes of this podcast, I spoke about it. But that was because that's when all the 4-barrel shit was becoming a thing. And I haven't spoken about it since. I have seen the blacklist. And so this blacklist, I don't know where it is now. I am not someone who easily believes shit. And I'm not someone who considers myself on the left or on the right. I'm a critical thinker and I challenge shit.
Sure.
And I want to preface what I'm about to say with that because it is not easy for me it's not easy to convince me that everyone's guilty of everything, right?
Sure.
And I don't want to see outrage culture become the norm. Just like I don't like the idea of virtue signaling, which I'm concerned that that's what a lot of groups that are coming out are doing. They're virtue signaling other people to get on board with their agenda without hearing what both sides of the story is.
Sure.
And so I was invited to be a part of a group on an online platform, and I've never said what that online platform is, so I'm not going to say it now.
Okay.
When I was a part of this online platform, and it's a secret online platform that is only for women and gender neutral humans. I don't know the right terminology for that, but you know what I mean. People who don't identify as men.
On the spectrum.
On the spectrum.
Right.
And on the gender spectrum, not the other spectrum.
No. Right. Gotcha.
Well, you have to be so careful these days of how you use these words. And so when I was in this group, there's a bunch of different categories in this group. And one of them was where this list existed. And I was shown this list. You have to be invited and verified into this group. And when you are, you have to commit to never copying and never speaking about the details of what's discussed in this group. And so one day I was shown this list and I'm like, this is a downloadable PDF. You have to be very, very fucking careful.
So circulating,
that this doesn't make it out of here. And the person who had introduced me into this group had said, no one would ever do that. This group is based on a bunch of respect. And when I watched somebody's name being added to the list, and then I watched the verification process that they went through to confirm somebody needed to belong on this list, I believed the list.
So the list is, what does one do to get on the list? That's what I mean. Is it purely about the kind of misconduct we've been talking about, or is it other?
It's predatory male behavior.
Oh, okay. Sure.
So predatory could include bullying, extreme bullying, but it's mostly predatory sexual behavior.
Okay.
When I saw this list, part of me was shocked that it was this long.
Uh-huh.
And because of promising, like, you make these commitments not to reveal the things that you've seen.
Right.
I remember seeing, you look for interesting ways to be able to create warnings about these things, because people's identities need to be protected. And by people's identities, I mean the people being the victims of this kind of behavior.
Sure.
So the way that women in our industry have found to protect themselves against this is to tell each other who they should avoid working for.
Right.
Which of course feels terrible because we can't tell everybody.
Well, it's unfortunate that that's the way it has to be handled versus talking about it openly. And, that list should be used to clean up the industry, to make the change that we've been talking about all day, rather than just acknowledge that this is there and it's happening and there's nothing being done about it.
Well, the legal ramifications of having a list like that could be huge, a list like this.
I'm not saying publish the list, because that's just a bunch of blatant accusations that all of a sudden everybody's going to say that's slander, that's this or that. But individually speaking up in these companies and changing the culture of wherever this is going on. And like I said earlier, I believe that there was going to be a much larger domino effect that happened from what we saw, and it never happened. But it would be not a shock to me, and it wouldn't. Yeah.
So help me understand something there.
Sure.
The thing, as women, a lot of us are terrified to speak up. Right. I'm fortunate, and this is going to sound strange, I'm fortunate that I've never been sexually abused in our industry, because a lot of the women that I know have. Pretty much every woman I know in this industry has been sexually harassed on multiple occasions. And pretty much every woman that I know has been bullied in this industry. If we do speak up, we're seen as just not getting the bro culture. And we're ridiculed. And
I'll tell you, you'd have to have some pretty, you'd have to be pretty bold to claim that there's a bro culture anymore in coffee. Who's going to, wrap themselves around that flag at this point?
Right, but a lot of the stuff we're talking about didn't happen, isn't happening now. This is decades worth of, it's decades worth of stuff, right?
Right.
And has gone on long enough for it to be systemic in loads of workplaces.
Sure. Yeah, it's not unique to coffee at all.
No, and when an employer feels like that because of his addiction to cocaine and pharmaceutical drugs, that it's okay to throw an employee up against a fridge. Without a care in the world for the ramifications, because he said to me, let's be real, you're never going to say anything. You'll never work in this city again if you did. And of course that's going to terrify me.
Sure.
Like, I'm not a weak woman.
Right.
But I'm still a woman who is terrified of that shit.
Yes.
And I'm terrified of not being believed, and I'm terrified of how people are going to think of me, and what did she ask? Like, how did she have it coming, and does she deserve it? Because, we all know that Lee is a strong woman, so maybe she just pushed him too far. Like all of this shit that comes from that, right?
Sure.
doesn't encourage women to speak up. But the part that I don't understand is that when the 4-barrel thing came out and a lot of these other instances that exist, all the men that I know said they knew about it. Well, why aren't the men speaking up? Why aren't the men going and saying to him, bro, we know what the fuck you're doing. Stop it.
Right. Well, I can't speak to that because I don't know of people who knew about that. I mean, it was a shock to me when that story broke because my interactions with Jeremy has been the opposite. I mean, I don't know him super well. I know him. I mean, I'm in the area and I know him from the area. In fact, I sold him the 4-barrel sample roaster. That was the first sample roaster he had. And I remember that was when he left Ritual, and I met him through that. But I was surprised. I wasn't surprised at, like, I saw some online or ads and stuff that people were, I don't know if they were mocking him up or making him up, but I know that his marketing angle was the kind of skateboardish, fuck you.
Well, it was fuck it. It was on the cups, right? Fuck
right.
it.
Yeah. So, I mean, like, okay, that attitude is going to spill into, it's going to, the idea that it gets to that gray area is definitely part and parcel of that kind of angle on just thinking. I think if you're somebody who believes in, like, I don't mind if I'm, alternative, or I'm going to be, on the cutting edge of stuff. Yeah, you think that that's somewhat socially acceptable at the time. Now, I don't know specifically how out of control a lot of this stuff got with him, but as a business partner, I would put the kibosh in that immediately because it threatens everything you have. I mean, beyond what it can do to the business, it's people that have invested in you and entrusted you to be responsible and run a company that can employ people and keep things above board. It's not just about you, and it's not just about you and your partners. It becomes about a much bigger responsibility to others. So that alone, as a business partner, that wouldn't be tolerated at all if it was with me. My company itself was predominantly, I had women, 70% of my employees were women in my company, on the farm as well. And so that kind of behavior would never have been tolerated because it was a direct threat to everybody who worked for me. And it would have ultimately pointed to me, who was involved in his community and served on boards and, was very active. I didn't want, that to be about what I represent or who I am and what I stand for. So I can't really speak to those close to him because I don't know what their motivations were. I just know that as a partnership, I have a hard time believing that they didn't know, because how do you hide that? That becomes a cultural, that's systemic in the culture of the company. Or HR, I remember reading an HR article where they kind of washed their hands of it. Well, we were unaware, but now that we are, we'll be on top of it. Well, then you have not been doing your job all along.
Right.
If you're just learning about this now, you're going to tell me, because a lot of the people that came forward were ex-employees. You're going to tell me that you didn't conduct one exit interview, or you had not heard one rumor. I mean, are you that poor at your job that you didn't pick up on this? And then
if that's the case,
to a great extent, follow up on it.
Right.
Right.
But what I'd love to hear your thoughts on, and I appreciate this is a difficult question. It's something I've struggled with, and if you don't have an answer, that's, this is something that culturally, I don't know that we've even got there yet as, excuse me, as a species, because I feel that culture is changing at a much more rapid rate than nuanced behavior is.
Right.
And I'm fascinated by the observation of that that's currently existing, both online and offline, right? But I feel that the answer to understanding a solution for this change that we're rapidly experiencing as a culture with regards to where the gender line lies with regards to respecting each other and looking after each other and all of that. Excuse me. It lies somewhere in the idea of us understanding, us being men and women and everything in between.
Right.
Excuse me. Us understanding when men know that this is going on with other men, like, and I keep hearing it. I keep hearing men saying, we all knew that this guy was like that. And I'm not specifically talking about Four Barrel here. I'm talking about all the other ones that haven't been
company
outed.
culture. Right.
That throat tickle has now made its way over here.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No problem. But what is it that stops men from speaking up? And I don't mean publicly, but going and schooling other men in a very quiet, polite kind of way in saying, hey, bro, you shouldn't be talking to women like that. Or you shouldn't be fucking your employees. That's a recipe for disaster.
Well, yeah. Well, I don't think that's a difficult question at all. I think that the employee thing, I mean, I could tell you a number of stories where this has come up, that where my reaction is, are you insane? Is this the only way you can meet somebody?
Is this the only way you can get laid, bro?
Yeah, that you're using your
hiring strategy.
Yeah, I mean, so that's just reckless. That's just absolutely reckless.
Do you have that conversation when you meet, like when you know colleagues in the industry that do that? Do you say something?
Oh, of course. Yeah. I mean, look, if anybody who knows me or listens to the podcast look, I have no filter when it comes to, my opinions, for better or for worse. And so absolutely is that something that I would bring up. But I think that within your company, like let's do intercompany politics. I think it's the same reason that you brought up with your story with the refrigerator, is that you're going to out your boss, and then what happens to you?
Right.
It's the fear of this person's in power, I'm not there. And man, woman, or non-binary, you're still subservient to that person, and you're going to stand the power. And this whole Joan of Arc thing, that I'm gonna out this and bring it out to light, you're not going to be rewarded necessarily. Sometimes you suffer repercussions because of that. So men have the same fear. It's the fear of, I'll never work in this town again or this industry again. The reputation that I'm a big mouth is going to get around, and I'm going to have a hard time, getting work. So I don't think that the dynamic's any different. Now, if you're talking peer to peer, that's different. That would boil down to your individual position on that kind of thing. I would think that regardless of male, female, male, female, you're sleeping with your employees, you've got serious, well, you're going to pay the price at some point. The laws since the 80s have been against you on this one, and you're going to lose. You maybe in the moment you think, okay, I could have some type of relationship with an employee, but you never think about when it ends and then what that repercussion is. It doesn't always end well. And you get somebody angry and then they're leaving your company. They just don't leave quietly.
No, there's sexual harassment lawsuits. And
you're going to pay the price. Yeah. And nowadays the laws are working against you. So, are there tons of reckless business people out there? Yeah, of course there are. God, we hear these stories all the time, and it's not ending. But I would say that, if as far as peer to peer, I've had peers tell me these things, and my thing is, don't go down that road. It never is worth it, and it never pays off. Or on the flip side, like, you believe it's going to develop into a full-blown relationship that can go on to whatever. is that a guarantee? Are you 100%?
Is it
just
worth the risk?
Yeah, the risk to benefit ratio of that. Why? Go meet somebody outside of your workplace. It's not that hard to do. In fact, it's very easy to do, and it's a much safer experience to do that. So, and then for working for large companies where this goes on, I mean, this is like I said, earlier, this is the first time I've worked for somebody outside of myself. So I don't know how that would play out in a large corporation. I mean, I just don't have the experience to point to that.
Excuse me, I'm sorry, I muted while I'm clearing my throat.
That's good.
I have an interesting scenario that we talked about on the podcast over the last couple of months. I'd love to hear your thoughts on it. There's a situation that I don't know how to resolve because there is a known sexual predator in, I've never said what country it's from, so I won't. Excuse me. There's a known sexual predator who built up a very successful coffee company, sold it for 51 million. During the time that he was building this company, he was a known. He raped a couple of women. None of them ever went, and it was more than a couple. The sexual harassment was off the charts. The rape was, the stories that have been shared to me are atrocious. And none of the women they just felt so much shame that they couldn't speak up because he was so powerful in our industry. Which is
often the case. Yeah.
Right. And so he had left the industry, and it turns out that he is coming back into the industry to sit on the board of the company he used to own. Mm-hmm. And when I found this out, it's funny, because I talk so publicly about every subject.
Right.
Excuse me. The little tips you get slipped by from the most bizarre corners of this industry shock me.
Right. Sure.
So someone sent me a message and said, I heard you talk about this particular thing on the podcast.
Yeah.
And I think you need this piece of information. I don't know what you're going to do with it, but do something with it. And because no one will come forward to talk against him,
right,
I can't say anything. He didn't do this stuff to me.
Right.
And I have no right to expose him or them because that's not fair to anybody.
Right.
But I also don't want to have him in proximity to our industry anymore. Mm-hmm. And I really don't know what to do. I don't know. I mean, it's such a difficult situation to be in. It's much like the blacklist. I know some of the people that are on this blacklist, and I'll never tell.
Right.
Doesn't that somehow make me complicit in the further acts that are happening because I won't tell? It's not my place to tell. I didn't have these experiences. It's a really fucking strange, bizarre Twilight Zone to be in. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And
I mean, I think the answer to your first question, I believe, I'm not totally sure about this, that when the initial story broke with the 4-barrel situation, it was anonymous. Only later did names come out. The people that had this done to them. That's how you do it. You have a writer who's willing to write a story and talk to these people, and their names don't have to be used, but it's substantiated by the people that are making the accusations. And then if they choose to come out at a later date, if they find the strength to say, I don't care if I get my name out there now, that becomes up to them. That's because that works. That story gets out. The Harvey Weinstein. Yes, I do. I mean, it has. It did with 4-barrel. I mean, when I first read it, my brain racked as to, who did I know that worked there, and hope to God it wasn't one of them. And then later, people came forward and started talking about it, and then you have a movement get started. So I think that's the best way to go about it. It's how Harvey Weinstein's story broke. People not wanting to lend their name to it at first because they were terrified of never working in Hollywood again. And now they don't mind talking about it because he went down.
Well, he hasn't now. They're thinking that, like, some of the lawsuits, the criminal charges were not the criminal charges, the civil suits against him were dropped.
Right. But I don't think he'll ever be in power in Hollywood again.
I have no idea. I
hope. Yeah. And if he is, then that's even more outrageous. That just sparks a revolution at that point. That takes it to a whole different level.
I hope so.
Because I don't think the answer is not going to be, well, this is what we just have to tolerate, because those days are gone. So even if he did come back and create a new Miramax, people would be so outraged. They would be. Well,
he's tainted now, right? Like, nobody wants to be
tainted permanently.
Right. Same. And you'd want to think that same as Jeremy. But I feel like we haven't had our Me Too movement of the coffee industry yet.
I think you're starting to have it now. I think it's happening. Like, it's happening on so many levels right now that it's like the earthquakes before the volcano erupts. You're feeling it everywhere, and it's about to happen. But again, those earthquakes are happening because they're looking for solidarity. They're looking for support and strength. Then they can erupt because there's a base of support there. And up until recently, the murmurings are out there, but there hasn't been enough of a groundswell of support to warrant a full-fledged, like, we're going to get all this out there. Things like what happened with Slate, and it's not the same type of situation as far as I'm aware.
No. It's from what I understand.
But something erupts like that, and it happens quick when it does. So I do think that you're seeing more support, and it's not just support from other women. There are plenty of men that support this as well, that have felt they played, that I've never crossed that line. Why would I? This is not why I go to work every day.
Right.
And they don't want anybody to have to work in an environment like that and have to go to work every day in that climate whatsoever. That's something that I felt up until recently that my dad's generations or the generations before him, that's how things operated. Certainly that's not happening in my generation. And not only is it happening in my generation, it's happening in the generations that are after me now. And so there are plenty of men that are willing to support that movement as well. Especially if it hits home for them, if they're aware of a friend or a coworker or somebody they admire in the industry or somebody that they've worked alongside that never told them, that they care about. Of course that they're going to do that. So, but I do think in your situation, to avoid that from happening, it's the people that this happened to have to speak to somebody. It can be on a basis of anonymity, and then that comes out, and then you see what happens from that. Usually companies this day and age don't want to even take the risk, and they'll wash somebody off the board like, we're not going there. Whether or not it's true, doesn't matter. We're not taking the risk right now. Nobody wants this.
And you're right. You're absolutely right on that. And that's why I thought, well, when I found out about it, I contacted a media outlet that I know happily takes loads of money from this company for advertising. And I had contacted the owner of this media outlet before because I had been made aware of a previous employee of theirs who was a well-known sexual predator within the industry. I didn't know he was, but when I found out, I was shocked that so many women had been accosted by this man. And he's not even a coffee industry professional. He's a chef that happens to be hired by this magazine to go to different trade shows and be associated with their dealings at different trade shows around the world. So when I was made aware of this first situation about this chef, when somebody asked if they could volunteer for an event that I was putting on for Map It Forward. And she had said to me that I just need to make sure that this company is not going to be one of the sponsors because of one of their employees. And I asked her to tell me the whole story. Well, when I found out about it, I contacted the perpetrator online and told him that I now knew what he had been doing, and I copied in a bunch of his coffee heroes into that Facebook message. But I then contacted his the person who owned the magazine. And when I spoke to the owner of the magazine and said to him, "Are you aware this happened with this employee?" And he said, "Oh, yeah. We
the magazine said this."
Yeah, the owner. I'm like, "So what did you do?" And he said, "Well, we all blocked him on Facebook and we never let him come to any events again." So he technically wasn't an employee of the magazine. He was just someone that we paid to come to work at our events. I'm like, so you blocked him, but didn't use your platform to address the situation? Issue an apology. You knew this was what he was doing. He's like, "Oh, yeah, because he was doing it to the wives of some of the women the men that were working for us." I'm like, hold up. So you know this was happening. What do you want me to do, Lee? I'm like, well, I will tell you something. I consider you now complicit in every fucking sexual situation that he commits against a woman since the moment you found out about it. That obviously didn't go down very well. But then when I found out about this second situation with regards to the person who's going to be on the board of this company that he's returning to, it turns out that this magazine was a huge supporter of this company and particularly this gentleman. And so I rang the owner of the magazine again and I'm like, "Listen, are you aware of this?" And he shut me down immediately. "It's not my fucking problem what people do in their own space away from this magazine. If he's doing it, he's doing it. It's not my problem. Contact me if you ever need any support for your events or for anything that you're doing. We'll happily support Map It Forward, but this isn't my business. It's not my problem." And this goes to the heart of what I think is a big part of what could be the solution. It's like we're turning our faces away from what is a known problem. We know that there are these people who are sexual predators. And he, as a man who is in a position of power, the owner of the magazine, could very easily take a position where he refuses to support any advertising revenue from this company, knowing that this is happening. But again, because this profit and loss statement looks really good because of the money they're throwing at it, should I just look the other way?
Well, I mean, I think that reaction that you just said is very short-sighted, and it's not going to serve them. If this does break, this ever comes out, this magazine is going to be running for the hills as to why were they supporting this all along, or why were they turning a blind eye? It just makes it worse for them. Again, it gets you nowhere to think that you cannot address this anymore. It doesn't. You may get away with it today, you may get away with it next week, but at some point you're going to pay the price for this.
I hope so, because I know that there are people in Hollywood that have gotten away scot-free. I know
plenty of people.
Oh yeah. I mean, the music industry is
same thing.
A fucking cesspit for Me Too shit.
Right.
It's a cesspit for. Why isn't the music industry having its Me Too moment? Same with the coffee industry. Like, all of us women and men were talking about how, like, oh shit, this is going to be horrible now. People are going to start getting closed down left, right, and center. Didn't happen.
Right. Well, it hasn't happened yet. I don't believe that this industry will escape it at all.
You don't?
No, not at all.
What do you think will be the changing moment?
Well, I think like I said, I think we're seeing it right now. I think that people have a voice and they have support, and they realize that that there is that they, if they were to come forward, that there are people there that are going to be there to aid them in this. And so that's the confidence that, has been lacking before, where it's, if you talk, you're going to pay a price, and where are you going to run? Where are you going to go? And now you can't do that, because now there's plenty of places for people to go. There's plenty of places for people to talk about this online and develop a support system. So I think you're seeing, the beginnings of it. But keep in mind, when you talk about for any type of cultural movement to change, this has really shifted in the past decade. And it's a pretty short span of time to see this amount of momentum move. So I don't think, I think that there is a need for us to be impatient. Like I want to see justice now. I want to see things change today. But a shift like this it happens slower. But nevertheless, it happens. And I think that if you have been operating as a business person under this kind of, this climate is perfectly okay, your days have been over for a while. You just don't know it yet. Right. And if you haven't changed your ways, my God, you've got to do it now and get on that. Now, I think that, somehow, like we were talking earlier about talking to the right wing and trying to appeal to whatever motivates them, with that has to be some ability to try to rehabilitate these people. Some, it may be culturally, they come from a different generation, they're older, and they just always, that's how they were taught that they, things were. That just makes them ignorant to what has changed. And can we change that mindset? Can we culturally change people? I think that my generation, I believe I'm older than you, but Gen X is right on the cusp of that. I'm
a Gen Xer, so.
Yeah, so, we have had to change a lot of the things that we believe from when we were in high school,
Absolutely.
what we were taught. So we've really taken on a lot and been expected to, you need to make a big 180 in your life, because the way your parents raised you is not how culture works anymore.
Oh, fuck no.
Someone my son's age, I think it's a lot easier, because, they were raised from the time he was born to, this is a different era. This is how things are run. And they got it at an early age. So, to me, if somebody from my age group and older, we have to rehabilitate them. Because just demonizing somebody, unless they're, horrific, there's,
right. Some people do need to just step aside. Other people, I'm a big fan of this idea of the road to redemption.
Right.
But I believe that there are certain things that need to happen as a part of that process. And a lot of it we haven't defined as a culture yet. There are some things that are pretty obvious. Like, hey, number one, I'm sorry needs to happen.
Right.
Acknowledge it and apologize for your role in it. And this isn't just for one. It's not just the perpetrator. It's all the stakeholders, the people who enabled it, the people who didn't do anything about it. All of it's a systemic problem that needs to be a systemic solution.
Right.
One where nobody's.
But that goes against everything a PR firm's going to tell you.
Absolutely.
See, we have to get rid of that, this idea that we have to be safe and cater to, what our PR agents are telling us to get out of a crisis. Is what we don't need to listen to right now. What we need to listen to is to get ahead of something and say, I did this, or I was a part of this, or I was complicit in this, and I'm sorry, and I accept responsibility. That goes such a long way compared to denying it until your back's against the wall and you can't deny it anymore because it's blatantly obvious you were complicit. That, I think, is what right now how most things that when you see these stories are currently operating. They come to that moment when they have no other place to turn. And the thing is if everybody's intellectually capable of understanding that behavior has never been okay. I don't understand where anybody would think that this is encouraged. Maybe, we would watch Mad Men and like laugh at that, the cultural things that were going on there. Like, wow, I can't believe that they were doing that back then. We know that some of that behavior was never okay. And some of it's a gray area, and that's where we need to sit with ourselves, realize this, and come to the terms that, wow, I need to change personally. I think our industry, like the association, should do this type of training.
Yeah.
We don't training somebody on latte art, it's great, but maybe it's training on workplace safety and workplace, harassment issues that are going on. It may not have happened in your company, and you may not have been a part of it, but it's important that you're aware that it does exist. And some of the employees that may come work for you may have came from that environment and maybe, sincerely damaged from that.
Traumatized by it.
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
And you need to know how to react to that and how to deal with that. So
that
just
takes
because
too much effort, didn't you know?
Well, it takes effort, but everything worthwhile takes effort. That's what I tell my son all the time. Yeah.
So
if it takes no effort, then it's not worth it in the long run.
Yeah, that's that whole Vision Quest theme again.
Right.
We have a resident psychologist on this podcast. He's become that because I keep referring to him loads. He's my best friend. He's a neuropsychologist, and he and I are going to put on assertiveness workshops for our industry, which are going to be all about boundaries and learning how to define your own boundaries, knowing how to assert your own boundaries, and understand the consequences of people stepping over your boundaries and you allowing people by being passive to make that happen. Sure. This is a silver bullet for our industry. Once people learn how to say what they mean and mean what they say, and when people start to recognize what it means to not be aggressive and not be passive, but rather be assertive, all of a sudden you get a more highly functioning and less dysfunctional industry that's operating off insecurity.
Right.
And I think that that's something that's important for our industry. I think that we don't acknowledge enough, going back to the story about the mosque, when they were told that it was haram. Haram means it's like evil. It's not good, right? It would be the opposite of kosher. So that's what haram means in Arabic. And so if the moment he said to these people that laying a finger on your wife in violence is haram, before that, they didn't know that.
Right.
They thought it was fine because as far as they had been taught by their fathers, this was the way that you're meant to treat women. And I've been on the receiving end of situations that were not, that were of a similar vein to that. And when I confronted the perpetrator, the response was, "I'm really sorry. We just didn't know any better." And you know what? I believed them. Because once they did know better, they were shocked, and the concept had never been brought up to them. The concept that you can't hit somebody just because you think you own them was never spoken to them by anybody.
Right.
I'm like, what kind of a fucking bubble do you live in that you're not hearing other people talk about the way you're supposed to treat your spouses and your children and the fact that you think it's okay to hit people? What's going on?
Well, but some people do live in bubbles like that.
Right, exactly. And that's my point.
There are people that live in religious cultures that they're not progressing, fast enough. And that's where they're getting their cultural cues from. Not all of us are so media. Well, the cultures as well, but not everybody's media savvy and have access and seeing, wow, there's a a global perspective that I'm missing out on here.
Exactly.
I am kind of a poor person to talk about the subject of religion and with, because I'm a complete atheist. I've never believed anything like that. Like Peter, it's like I'm a science, founded person.
I'm no religion either. So
to me, it's like it's easy for me to lump all my grievances with religion in general for a lot of the world's woes, but it does come down to this kind of these bubbles that you grow up in, whether it's cultural, whether it's religious, whether it's some type of fraternal organization of any kind that indoctrinates you into a certain way.
Shout out to the Illuminati.
Right. Well, it's hard for you to break free of that. It's hard for you, and then when you do, you're ostracized from that group, which is even more terrifying because it's all you know.
Yep.
Like you hear these, down in Hollywood where, you lived is, people that try to break away from the church to Scientology, and they are literally ostracized from their group
harassed and
they may have never known better or different. Right. And so at that point, do you villainize that person, or do you say, I get it, you didn't know, you truly didn't understand? And so it's complicated. It's extremely complicated.
And my point to that is that those people work in our industry. Our industry has such a low barrier to entry in that we have no kind of education process that requires you to be a part of our industry or to have businesses in our industry. And so you can be of any cultural background in a Western country, holding your cultural or religious values, and operate in our industry and bring those values into this industry and be using those values as a way to run a business, whether it be that you pay people almost nothing, or you sexually harass people, or you think it's okay to lay a hand on someone and beat the shit out of them, or you talk shit to those people. Like, we don't have a way of talking to people as an industry of this is what's acceptable and what's not acceptable. We're not old enough as an industry where we have cultural norms.
Right. Even though the industry is quite old.
Right.
I mean,
the
coffee
industry
in
is
general.
Right, but not in the fashion that it is evolving into. And this is where I'm on a daily basis. I think about how do we help people get to a point where they're running a healthy cultural environment in their workplace where everyone is conspiring to everybody else's success. Right now, we have a chicken and an egg scenario whereby you've got employees that are being paid minimum wage that don't know whether they want to have a long-term career here. And so because they're getting paid minimum wage plus tips, they're not giving 100%. And you've got employers that don't want to pay anymore because the employees that are working for them aren't proving that they deserve more. But the employees will work harder if you want to pay them more. But then the employers can't pay anymore because they're working on such slim margins anyway. So it's this perpetual chicken and egg bullshit that nobody's kind of working towards this, how do we make things better? Because everyone's
it's exactly what we talked about on the podcast that the exchange last week about the idea of retail, which I'm been pretty against all along.
Awesome episode.
Because you've created an industry that is, you can't pay a living wage to these people. So do you want to participate in that? I've constantly rung the bell of think twice about getting into that side of the industry because it's A, much harder than you think. B, the money's not there that you think is there. And C, you're creating a dead end world, for most of your staff. It's a high turnover, which makes it hard for your company. And whereas I shared the story of, at my company, I had retail stores that just sold whole bean coffee. We had packaged in steel cans. Customers could come in and refill their can in the store. So they were their own labor, and I sold equipment. And the difference there was I was able to pay my staff a starting wage in those stores of $20 an hour with full benefits, which I couldn't do.
Unheard of today. And that was how many years ago, Mark?
Oh, just 8 years ago.
But still, it's a lifetime in this industry.
Yeah. But it's because I had a retail model that the average ticket price was higher than a latte or a cup of drip coffee. And I would often, I like to say provocative things in a lot of the presentations I give. It's how I've gotten this far. So at the time, I would say that TaylorMade was much more successful than Starbucks, when people would be like, "Oh, brother, like here he goes again." And the meaning behind it was 80% of my staff owned homes in Sonoma County.
Yeah.
80% of Starbucks employees don't own homes.
No.
And I was able to pull that off because of the model I created. And so in that regards, I am much more successful to them. And so you're absolutely right. You have to look at the business models that you have and think, do they work for everybody? I find it crazy that coffee companies that talk about, direct trade and farmers' rights and all this, the farmers getting screwed and we need to pay them more. And meanwhile, they've got, 60% of their staff are working for minimum wage. It's like, maybe you need to focus your attention in your own company first before you try to solve the problems of the developing world, which are very complicated as well. So let's deal with one issue at a time here.
It's when you start looking at the complexity behind the coffee supply chain, one thing that becomes very apparent, but you have to be focusing on it quite intensely to see it.
Right.
What's happening at origin is so the back end of the supply chain is mirroring what's happening at the front end of the supply chain, the very front end of the supply chain.
Right.
And I mean that from both the employee and the employer perspective, because you have the barrier to entry low from both perspectives.
Right.
You have employees being underpaid and exploited. Right. You have business owners that don't know how to read financial statements and aren't actually doing this to run businesses. They're doing them because that's either what they know how to do. So they either know how to farm or they're passionate about being in coffee.
Right.
Neither of those are the holistic skill sets that are required to run successful businesses.
Right.
And that's and this goes to that thing of, I'm really happy and excited about the fact that people want to talk about the difference between the farm gate price and the FOB price and the landed cost and the wholesale price and the retail price of coffee.
Right.
That's great.
Sure.
But you're basing that on a foundation that hasn't been laid yet. Because until we can actually get farmers understanding what their cost of production is and the cost of doing business is, these fucking numbers mean nothing. Right. Because if you're paying a farmer $4 a pound for an 84 coffee, good for you. But have you asked that farmer how much the cost of production was for that 84 point coffee?
Sure.
Because I guarantee you a lot of the farmers that I've spoken to, actually 100% of the farmers that I've spoken to, when I ask them, and I don't speak to them about this on the podcast, this is difficult for them to admit, but 100% of the farmers that I've spoken to have said to me, I don't actually know what my cost of production is. I cannot tell you what the cost per pound of production is per lot. I don't know how to calculate that. And I certainly don't understand what the cost of doing business is when I have to take into account the massive debt that I've taken out and the interest, the cost
the interest is atrocious. Yeah.
All of it. Like, we're talking in some cases of 30% these farmers are paying on loans. And so
not in some cases, in most cases.
In most cases.
Yes.
And so when we're talking about this kind of stuff, I put out so I'm working on a project plan at the moment for, how do we map out the coffee supply chain for each origin? And in there, I thought, I wonder how many farmers have insurance. So I got onto WhatsApp and I contacted about 60 farmers.
Yeah.
You know how many of them have crop insurance?
Probably zero. Or maybe in Brazil, there's some, but not.
Well, in Brazil, it's only the big farms
have
crop insurance.
Sure.
0% of these farmers have crop insurance, which is fucking outrageous.
Right. But, in many of the cases, I can't imagine a country that would write that insurance because because the failure rate is so high that they'd be paying out all the time on it.
So, and this is something that I wanted to talk to you about is that I don't know if you got a chance to notice that we had Carly Garner. She is a commodities broker.
Mm-hmm.
And she contacted me the other day to say, hey, listen, I saw that you mentioned that coffee farmers don't have crop insurance. We can help them get crop insurance for somewhere around about $500 per contract.
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, how would you do that? And she said, it's not actually insurance. You can buy an option against a contract.
Selling options, yeah. But that's, for a farmer, that's pretty sophisticated. And for most roasters, trading options
is completely off their
Well, they look at it like all of a sudden I'm playing roulette in a casino. How does this work? And how is the house taking advantage of me? Exactly. I have, tried to explain options. In some cases, it makes great sense for people to do them, but it's a very tough sell because it's not like insurance in the sense that
it's not a contract that says, okay, if your equipment breaks down, we'll replace the equipment.
Right.
It's not anything like that.
No.
And hey, I'm just like throwing shit up against the wall and see
Sure.
what sticks, because I think that it's these kinds of approaches that we need to take. Like if a roaster
Mm-hmm.
was able to say to a farmer, instead of like me buying a new thing of equipment for you, me shelling out, X amount of thousands of dollars to get this for you. What if they could fund one of these options for a certain amount?
But the roaster would have to understand how options work.
Right.
And I would say outside of the large companies, they don't get it any more than the farmer does.
So Carly has agreed to provide education through a webinar for these roasters.
Yeah. Oh, they do it at the SCA every year.
Awesome.
There's the I'm losing his name now. FP Stone. They do seminars. The PCCA, which is California Pacific Coast Commodities Association, does a 2-day intensive on options. So there's plenty of opportunities for, if you're a roaster and you work for a company, I'd highly encourage you to ask your employer to sign you up for this seminar, because it's well worth your time. It's well worth the company's expense to send you there, because not only does it open the door for this solution that you're talking about, but it opens the door, because right now when you buy coffee, just the way you're doing it, if you were to call me up, and even if you bought it fixed price or differentially, you're buying something without insurance. And so especially if it's unfixed, the market's moving around, and you can't predict, you can't tell your customer, I can sell you coffee at X because I haven't fixed my contract yet. I have no idea what my costs are. Well, options puts a cap protection. It only can go like this. So this is the room I can quote in, because it will never go above and it will never go below. And so that's alone worth looking at, because it can at least give you price consistency. Now, if you want to be a gambler, yes, you can play options and make money and never have to look at you can make money and never have to touch a pound of coffee in your life if that's what you want to do. But for the most part, of course, but for the most part, it's an insurance policy to protect price, and not enough people entertain it, and they should be doing it. So yes, if you're at the SCA, take the class. If you see the PCCA is offering this, take it and lobby, have your employer call me direct. I'll be glad to tell them why it's a worthwhile expense. It'll reap benefits for your company. But the other way to accomplish what you're suggesting is what I've worked with a lot of clients on, is this idea of, I want to pay more for coffee, so let's just tie it into the price of the coffee. And then that becomes complicated for many reasons. Like, say I'm going to add, the differential in Colombia for, Supremos is, plus 23 right now. I'm going to just offer you plus 50. Just out of the blue, you make up this bigger number. And what it does is it sends a message to the grower that now the permanent floor price for this is plus 50 no matter what. And so if the market shoots to $3,
they want plus 50 on that.
Of course, you're going to say, whoa, the market's gone up. That was then. They're going to say, no, you quoted this. So what I've always encouraged people to do is to offer the normal differential that you guys have agreed upon for this product. And then if they meet, I want it to be at least 84, or I want to see that you've done this improvement or whatever, I'm going to then give you an additional social premium on your product because you've done the good faith, this idea that if I give them the money up front, they just disappear into the night. I never see them again. Well, if they've delivered the product as you asked for, to your spec and to your into your satisfaction, that you have an additional premium added to that price that gets paid like a brokered commission.
Is that what a differential is?
No, the differential is the price. There's the market price.
The C market price.
The C market price, and then you would add on. Every country has a differential base. So like in Colombia, for example, UGQs have just an average differential of this, an Excelso, an average differential of that, and then a Supremo. And then things like 84 plus or Rainforest Alliance certified or organic adds to those differentials. Okay. And you add the total differential to the C market, and that's your price of coffee. Now, in addition,
determines that differential.
So the base differential for like a Guatemalan HG or a Mexican HG is determined by the country. Okay. And then anything in addition to where, I do a complete women's grown coffee. Mm-hmm. Okay, well, what's the differential difference for that between a normal HG? Well, then it would be either the cooperative says, this is our additional differential. That just becomes a negotiated thing. Or if you said, I have pure Typica or pure Bourbon, and I'm not doing, Catchymores.
It's organic. It's like all these kinds of...
organic is another one. So then you're just stacking on the base differential of the country. That becomes in addition to the final price. You could put on top of that your own social premium that's just negotiated between you and I. You've delivered to me for 5 years in a row. If you have a crop failure, I'm going to give you 50 cents a pound for what you would have normally delivered, regardless of what you actually delivered, because you've met in good faith all these years. You could contract that, and that is something that a farmer can take to a bank and say, this roaster has already agreed to this differential, this social premium, so I'm covered, and they could get pre-financing against that. So you're able to, always tack on. At the end of the day, there's the the normal New York contract that's out there. And then you could add, like in any contract, any kind of rider or addendum to it that's still binding and it will still be held up. But that farmer is able to take that to a bank and get pre-finance against that. If you're not, like we would pre-finance as an importer, but just say you're dealing direct. As long as they see it in writing and you're obligated to it, there's no way for you to get out of it. They can use that to fund their, whatever they're needing pre-financing for, to hire labor or to pay for milling expenses or whatever it is to get it to you.
That's the first time anyone's explained differentials to me that made sense. Thank you. Help me understand something.
Sure.
All right. So the C market is very different to what I thought it was. So it's a hedging mechanism. It's not necessarily a mechanism for people buying coffee.
No.
Can you actually buy coffee off the C market?
Yeah, you could buy a contract.
So you buy a contract.
What they call it. So what we would do as an import company, not the specialty division of Olam, but the commercial, is that we would tender coffee to the exchange. And so you buy you just come to me and say, I want to buy a 1 May 2020 future. Right. And here we come up to April, first notice day. You didn't fix or apply the same thing. After first notice day, all of a sudden, a container of coffee is heading your way. It can be from any country that is tenderable to the exchange, but it meets the exchange grade minimum for a C, and it's yours.
And
the
if
way
the
you
contract
stop
expires, if the
If it-
contract expires, you have to take receipt of that coffee, right?
It's exercised, yeah.
Right.
You'd have to roll the contract to get out of it, or apply it to something different.
Or sell it. Is that what
Or
rolling
or
is?
sell it, but you have to sell it before first notice day. After
Okay.
that's happened, the market's that month's close, you can't sell it anymore.
Okay, so if you sell,
And there are plenty of companies that just they buy and sell
right,
exchange
that's the
coffee.
way they hedge.
Yeah,
right?
it's perfectly fine for them.
Yeah, and most what's the word for it? Speculators.
Yeah.
So we're in a steep learning curve at the moment on this stuff, which was why your name came up actually as someone to talk to about all of this stuff, because you're so well versed on a lot of this stuff from the inside of the industry as opposed to the outside of the industry. And when we talk about outsiders of the industry that trade on the sea market, these are these speculators that just spend a fuck ton of time buying and selling contracts,
right?
Just to make money,
right?
My thing is, like, if you have a contract and you add, this is a question.
Sure.
So these differentials that you're talking about, and they're stacked onto the base C, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is that a differential that's stacked onto a contract that's bought on the C, or is it bought like
it's using the C as a reference point. So
it's not connected.
Yeah, they are connected, because what ends up happening if you're buying and selling differentially is that the language would be, I want to buy a pound of Colombian Supremo.
Okay.
I don't say it's $2.50, Lee. I say it's plus 50.
Which is on top of the C price.
The C, whenever you say, I'm fixing today. So what ends up happening in some cases, you can be a roaster and buy low, but you're not screwing the farmer, because you're fixing different from the farmer. The farmer sells at a plus, whatever. Okay. And then they're waiting, they're watching the market. And if the market starts to creep up, they'll race in, fix it now. So if they get 5-cent jump, that's a couple $1,000s additional income for them.
Per contract.
So, per contract.
37,500 pounds.
Right. And you can wait for the market to drop and then say, I want to fix my plus 50 now. And so that's where your final price is determined. And
that gap is kind of the hedging, right? So they've hedged because they've sold higher and you have bought lower.
Right.
And so that's a form of hedging.
In a perfect world. But sometimes you're buying high and the farmer's selling low, or the farmer sells high and you bought high. In the case, they'll say, well, then you as the importer, you're playing casino. So are you losing money when this gap happens? No, because it's one fixes,
you're playing both sides.
Right. So we're not playing any stake in this. Now, do we have a spec division that's playing it just like you said, buying paper? Yes, of course we do. But you can lose a lot of money that way. I mean, there are stories of import houses, one import house in particular, that lost $120 million in one day on bad trading. $120 million in one day on just bad trading in the market. So, a lot of import companies have dramatically limited the ability to play speculation. Usually it's a very small percentage of their entire inventory that they can actually spec on the market. The rest of it is done just buying, hedging, buy and sell. So, the import company is only making their margin. It doesn't matter what you guys as the roaster or the grower are doing. We're not playing in either game right there. The problem with that is two things. One is that not every either farmer or co-op leader or large estate owner understands the market conditions well enough to know when to fix. Because it's like gambling. Well, I walked away from the table. I could have won 10 more hands of blackjack. Yes, but you could have lost 10 more hands as well. So don't get mad because, the market went up after I fixed. What an idiot I am. There's no way you could have predicted that. No, it could have also went the other way and you could have been totally screwed. So when people ask me like, well, when should I fix my coffee? If you're a roaster, my answer is when you know you're going to make a profit on selling it.
Mm-hmm.
Anything, that's better is just icing on the cake, but don't get greedy, because if it shoots up the other way and you miss your opportunity to make profit, then you're all of a sudden working at a loss or working for free that year. So always, fix when you see a profit is there. And for a farmer, same deal. If you know that I made money this year, then fix it. Don't worry about what could be, because the market is volatile. And right now, with how low it's been sitting for quite some time, any jump is a good jump if you're a grower right now. But getting to the original point of our conversation about how can we help farmers, I think any coffee above an 84 cup is not a commodity anymore. No. It's a different thing. And it should be all fixed flat pricing at that point, which doesn't matter where the C market is. And that happens in the case of Kenyans or higher end Ethiopians, or Kona, for example. It doesn't matter where the market is. We're selling our coffee at this price, take it or leave it. And because Kenya has such high demand for really good coffee, people are like $7 a pound for Kenya in a $1.07 market. Sure, that's fine. Well, that's like a plus 490 differential. Yeah. But it doesn't matter, because they are saying this is where we need to make our money. And Ethiopia, saying grade 1 Yirgachefs, this is what we're selling them for. Doesn't matter where the market is. Other countries that are producing these higher quality coffees should have the confidence to start quoting like that, because roasters are already ready to accept that. And it will, for the specialty side of the industry, become the norm. It has to be, because it won't work otherwise. But the what ends up being a problem is you have, and I've seen it in numerous contract negotiations, is the roaster saying, hey, I want to give you a fair price for the coffee. I want to ensure that you're doing well. So, let's do a fixed price of X, which I know is more than it costs you to produce this. And the farmer will say, okay, but can we just make that a differential so I can at least keep the market open? And it's like, wow, you want to gamble on top of the gift that was just given to you. Don't do that. This is your chance to break away from the sea permanently. Take the opportunity and run. Unless you're just like a large Brazilian farmer that has 5,000 acres, farm, and you're doing everything mechanically, and you could do it at a cost of production of 80 cents, get out of the sea if you can do it. You don't want to be tied to it anymore. But the problem is not everybody could play in that arena, because not everybody knows how to grow coffee of that quality, or has the resources, or has the education to learn how to get there. And that's, again, going back to the original challenge that we talked about. Yeah. This is an industry-wide. There needs to be a renaissance, an educational renaissance in our industry, to teach farmers to look at their farms as micro enterprises. It's a small business at the end of the day.
Yeah.
And it's a gourmet business. Forget the commodity. Just get that out of your head. If you have a farm under 10 hectares, you're too small to be a commodity grower. Yep. Your days you've been written out of the industry. Just like, if you're in the US and you think manufacturing's coming back, it's coming back in a quaint, hey, I bought some handmade jeans out of, yeah, that's great. But the days of like large factories are over here.
All in China.
Right. So don't create a business model that's saying we're going to have eventually large scale manufacturing here, because you're fighting against the tide.
Yeah.
If you could do specialty small manufacturing, wonderful, jump all over it. It's great. But the same thing applies to farming. If you're a small farmer, you have to grow high end. You have to grow heirloom. You have to grow things that are desirable. This race that everybody's planting geisha, and it's like, oh boy, this is getting to be cliche. Well, yes and no. They're doing it because they see, wow, they could actually survive if they plant this at the prices that are being given. So, throw a bone to these growers. Jesus, they're trying to survive. And I do think that there are other varieties that are just as warranting of these higher prices. But small farmers have to realize any opportunity to become a fixed flat price seller is the way to go.
And we just hit 3 hours.
I know. I was waiting for you to be like, I'm done talking to you. Jesus, you rattle on for too long.
No. Are you saying that to me? I'm sorry.
No. I thought you'd be accusing me of that. Like, just
no, I could
talking.
sit here and talk to you for another 3 hours. I was just looking at it going, what an amazing 3 hours. We covered so much, but I feel like we just got started.
Right.
And that was like a really great natural point to end the conversation before we start on the next cycle of what ends up the next 3 hours. Mark, this was awesome.
Well, thank you.
I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did.
Oh, no, I loved it. It was fantastic. Yeah.
Awesome. I hope you'll come back again. And thank you for the podcast that you're doing, because I really think that it speaks to an audience that I can't access. And you talk real. Like, this is the thing that I want to encourage anyone. If you have the courage to like start a podcast and not hide behind, oh, I'm not allowed to say the word fuck and I'm not allowed to say this, and I'm like, just start talking real talk. Please go and start a podcast. I hope we have many of them. But if you are looking for another podcast and you listen to this podcast religiously, please go and listen to Mark's podcast, The Exchange. It is talking a lot of the stuff that we talk about in a different way of delivering the same message. And so thank you, sir. This was awesome.
It was my pleasure, and I will do the same. Make sure to plug you tomorrow night when Todd gives me grief that I broke away from him and came to talk to you alone.
You're cheating on him with me.
I know. He's very upset. Yeah.
Have an amazing rest of your... Oh, by the way, we have to talk about... So we're going to talk about the Trump thing. We're going to solve that problem, and we are going to solve the options issue with getting farmers educated, or farmers and roasters educated about that. We walked away from this with to-do items. I love a good meeting like that.
Yes.
Have a great day, mate.
Thank you very much. Take care.
Take care.
Bye-bye.